Muy buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being in the second session of the Madrid Games Week, organized by the Community of Madrid, the City Hall of Madrid, Ivy, and IFEMA. Starting tomorrow and until Sunday, we will have the great trade fair of video games in Spain, hosted in IFEMA. This is why we have organized this Congress to get some experts to discuss video gaming. Yesterday we had the philosopher Gregorio Lure explaining the motivations to play video games, and he said we play because we're human. This is in our nature. Video games are entertainment or fun, but are also a development tool that has a very good impact in fields like education, culture, and health. Yesterday we had some examples, and we will see some other examples today. I thank you for being here today, and also for those who are following through streaming on the website of Fundación Telefónica. We are also on social networks with the hashtag CongresoMGW. I'd like to welcome Antonio José Planes de la Maza. He is the narrative designer of video games and university professor. He will be presenting on the creation of fiction worlds.
Buenos días. ¿Se escucha? Sí, bien. Bueno, yo voy a hablar de mundos que habitamos.
Well, I'll be speaking of worlds that we inhabit. This is a strange concept. It's not about creating worlds, but about the worlds of culture, which are the connection between the real world and video games, and this is a two-way relationship. Before the introduction, I will just introduce myself. I have brought my own books. I'm an expert in video games, in the theory of possible worlds, which is understanding games not as a story, but as a world where things could happen. And I combine this research at Pompeu Fabra in the Techno Campus Center with the narrative design with TH Nordic. We are developing a game now that will be launched soon. As for culture, what happens with culture in the framework of culture? I think this is especially relevant. Culture is a concept that, from the academic point of view and industrial point of view, has several meanings, but culture is always a battlefield for legitimation or lack of legitimation. That happened to TV, comics, and graphic novels. And the same goes for video games, but what's different with video games is that we are in a moment where there is a boom of social networks, exactly when video games became legitimate. It used to be a toy, but now it wants to be something more. So here we have a classical pair, and that probably you know if you have studied communication. According to ECHO, this is the fight between integrated apocalyptics. The apocalyptics are those who always think that this is the cause, the media is the cause of catastrophes. And then we have integrated, which is also a group that, as an end of the pendulum, they glorify the media, the medium. Where we can see this on Twitter. Each week we see many industrial revolutions every week on Twitter, and one of them is video games as devil or as the cure for cancer. And this is not a joke. We have read something like this. Okay, these two extremes are interesting because we're dealing with specific things, but we don't go into detail. Here I have brought two discourses. The first one is almost mathematical. When we see an article or a research article on video gaming as culture, the first thing that we see is that video games sell more than X. I think this is curious because it's necessary to sell in order to become culture. This didn't happen to poetry, and we cannot say that drug trafficking is culture because it sells a lot. So the arguments are industrial arguments, but we can see it from the other point of view, which is this complex of inferiority of video games compared to art, to established art. Is video games, is this art or not? We can all understand that video games is a part of culture and art structures, and also this relationship, this review of filmmaking, like what's the Citizen Kane of video games? We wouldn't think this, what is the Don Quixote of video games? But this debate is part of the logics of capitalism of video games. Video games are capitalistic resource, and what's important is why we should focus on the content, not on the value of production. Value of production, as Lipovetsky said, this is about when art becomes capital, or when Terry Egerton realizes that we cannot separate the idea from the cultural medium. To focus on video games, there's a very interesting author, Miguel Sicard. He's an expert in ethics. He's now in Copenhagen, and in a conference recently he used these sentences from one of his books, Play Matters. He says that games don't matter. What's important is the play. Well, there's a language barrier here with Spanish, because game and play are different things. We speak a lot about games, not about the leisure culture. It's like you are pointing the moon and you look at the finger. So we are focusing on the toy, but we're forgetting very important questions. Some of them are reflections I just want to share with you. The first one is, who do we play with? Video games have evolved a lot in this sense. We have passed from logics of arcade saloon. We were playing with friends. We have gone to the online games. This is what some call the remediation of media. We take the practices of medias and recycle them. This we have done with the role plays or table games. We are in a hyper-connected society. We are all highly connected, and we have this course. The more connected we are, the more lonely we are. This is related with Instagram and with the culture of happiness and mindfulness. This is not applied to video games. There are some causes why we don't analyze why video games are not in this discourse logic of the issue of online games and the loneliness of those who play online games. This is one side. The other side is that there are people that are online and they discover a special projection, and people who are lonely with these online games, they have a way to project their identity. But there's another side that we don't mention, and another problem is gambling. In Spanish we speak about luck games. In English we say gambling. Gambling is a problem. It's not a problem because I'm telling you today, we know this is a social problem in many countries. The European Union has started to take action on this. Last week here in Madrid, in the district of Carabanchel, there was a demonstration of parents because their children are addicted to gambling, to online gambling, and this is a question where video gaming has not taken action. It should separate itself from gambling, should fight gambling at the physical level, and also stop using gambling mechanics on video games. And this is because we know that when we the industry knows that when we take mechanisms like free-to-play, like on FIFA, we are trying to have our users become addicts. There's a question about if video games are addictive or not. We could have a debate on this. Some people are addicted to video games, but if also video games are allowing these mechanisms to be incorporated as video gaming mechanics, this is a problem. The other question is, what do we play? If this medium is culture, a cultural medium is able to create models that are timeless and narratives that are timeless. We have seen this in literature and filmmaking. What happens with video games? I give you two realities. We have prevailing model, which is the AAA, that makes lots of money. These are games that use typical resources, like you are an active operator of a power fantasy. So I'm playing and I'm gaining power. I go from level 1 to level 90. It's based on role games. Role games generated this fantasy of power that provides pleasure. We are researching at Pompeu Fabra that AAA is like in a loop, in a repetition of plots. Why is it about looking for things, about a hero that's like a prophet, a messiah that's going to save the day? This is because if you are familiar with the epical works, revenge is a way to justify what you do. If you are taking a revenge, you don't have to justify anything. And looking for a treasure is the same. These logics are in current AAAs, but we have a very long story of games where characters are looking for something or for revenge. There's another side of the coin, which are underrepresented worlds, and I'll use a label here, which is indies, which are the smaller studios, and we cannot compete in terms of production, so we compete on other issues, and one of these issues is experimenting with new plots and with author perspectives. This is based on the author theory of Vassin, of filmmaker as an author that has his own way of doing things beyond the ways of the industry. Then we have peripheral stories, peripheral tales. So this is not about our revenge. For example, I'm going to tell you how the system alienates subjects. So we have the paper pleasing when we are the watcher of a border of a communist state, so we are part of the oppressive state. So this is related with the theory of the evil of Harari. So we are part of the oppression, we are alienated. Also, Go Home, where we have different gender identities, or games where we discuss sorrow or the loss of a loved one. There are two examples, like Edith Finch, where we, through mechanics, we can see how is the loss of a family, and we understand what happens. And then Papo and Yo. This is a boy that goes with a monster, and with the monster eats some frogs. He will hit the boy, and when the boy gives a lemon to the monster and it's quiet, it cools down. So this seems to be very weird, but there is an author intention to this. The author had been ill-treated by his drunken father, and so this contradiction between the frog and becoming evil and the lemon and becoming cool, this is about his own story. We will see how in this game how the main character has to leave this monster and lead a happy life or die because he wants to stay with the monster. These are things that we play, but I have mentioned some of the problems with some of these things that we play. One of them, related with mainstream, is that there is a loop. There's a loop in mainstream where mainstream does not dare to take innovation in the leisure forms. It is increasingly expensive to develop a AAA, so you have to reduce risk. And so the first impact of this is on culture. This leisure simplification, we have seen it with different nuances. This is an interesting reflection. The new father relationships in video games. I'm killing people out of revenge, and now I'm killing people out of revenge, but I have a song. So it's a way of repeating what we are doing. And what's interesting about indie, which has been the spearhead of the discourse and the narrative and innovation, at the end of the day, and this is also interesting and controversial, has been conditioned by the system. If you use Stream, you will see that there's a label for indie. So the system has already identified that this new option is so interesting for marketing and for labeling. It has been labeled. This has happened to indie. So a creator that uses pixel art aesthetics will have the label of indie. This is a problem in the industry, but another one that I think is important and serious from the point of view of university is going back to the romantic idea of the author that's going through a bad time, and because of this he's got this genius personality. So in the university we have gone from creating things based on culture to creating things based on talent. This is linked to the glorification of depression. We have many video games that discuss new identities, but also an increasing number of video games that link the depression of the author with the game he has created. So there is a logic where if you are depressed, it is even good for creating. This idea of glorifying mental illness not as an issue that I express by creating a game, but as a requirement for creation. And the last question that I wanted to discuss here is not who or what we play, but what's on stake, what are we playing for? A bit of theory context. Based on the theory of culture and the theory of communication, we know we have gone from the panoptical of Foucault to the seducing model. Foucault predicted that the social institutions, the school, prison, these are ideological systems to control individuals. The panoptical are this model of prisons around the eye of the guardian. The guardian can see what all prisoners do. And Iful Byung-Chul Han says that we have gone from this to the seduction model. So there's not a guardian watching us, but we exploit ourselves. This is the idea of LinkedIn and the personal branding concepts. So the capitalist system is not telling us what to do, but we are part of the system. This idea is reinforced. You have a great example on Black Mirror in the chapter where someone is living essentially just for social media and just to get the approval of other people. So we are part of the capitalistic system. We also have the idea expressed by Saden in the colonization of the world, and he says that together with this seduction idea of virtual hand, there's another concept, which is the idea that Silicon Valley as a concept and the startup concept has proliferated in the world. This has been a cultural colonization. Everyone wants to have a startup in their village. And what happens with this is that we have introduced the logics of the entrepreneurs and the self-exploitation that reinforces the model of seduction. Why is this interesting? This is interesting because in video games there's a problem of how leisure takes part of this seduction model. We are playing to have a good time. So gaming is about fun. If you go to the basics of anthropology, Joseph Finger, he did a research on how cultures have always played. All cultures have always played, from the most remote cultures to current cultures. They all have play as a resource. He defined game as a voluntary and autonomous and non-productive action. When I'm playing with my friends a video game, I don't want to produce anything. I play because I want, and I'm playing in an autonomous way. Nobody's telling me what to do. What happens in this context, if we analyze what's going on in the leisure culture and this system, is that there are some practices where there are companies that force their employees to play. So we are giving a leisure side to work. So the production systems of work are becoming game, because game is appealing, is easy, but it's not true that everyone wants to play. But if we turn companies in a system where there is productive game, we're reducing leisure culture to this space. We have to understand that playing must be autonomous and non-productive, because if it goes from being leisure to being production, there's no game anymore, but there's a capitalistic culture of seduction which is highly productive. Therefore, in this debate between apocalyptic and integrated, if is game evil, or is gaming the cure for cancer, or is gaming going to force your children to go out on the street with a katana? What's the right answer? Maybe the question is wrong. Maybe the answer should be to a different question. It's not about what game is or is not in an extremely situation. It's about what we do as a society with leisure and the leisure culture. It's not about the game, which would be the finger pointing the moon, but the culture of gaming that would be the moon. This is what we should expect, and this should be our reference for our fight from culture and also from the industry. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, en todas las charlas...
Well, in yesterday's presentations and also this presentation by Antonio, we have one word, there's one term that we hear all the time, which is culture. Video games are culture. In the future, historians will analyze the 20th century, and it won't be possible to describe us without mentioning video games, as we should mention filmmaking, literature, sport, or TV. We will discuss more this relationship between filmmaking and video games and education. We have Rufino Ferreras, Belén Moreno, that's responsible of the first video game focusing on dancing, and Cody Dyer. Welcome.
Bueno, por si acaso doy el aviso de que...
Well, I'd just like to let you know that Cody would be speaking in English. So first I'll give the floor to Rufino Ferreras, responsible of the education department of the Thyssen Museum, to tell us what is the Thyssen Museum doing in relation with video games. Well, good morning everyone, I'm Rufino Ferreras. I work at the education department of the Museum Thyssen-Bornemisza, and in relation with gaming, I should say that we are a non-formal educational department, so the use of leisure, the leisure component, is essential for us as a tool to disseminate art and our collections. Starting in 1998, we started a work line related with the digital, working especially with video games. We have published 9 small video games, and we have gone through a process of learning, knowledge and immersion on this gaming context. We started with small video adventures because we didn't know what stories, what narratives we could use on video games. Our goal was not to attract more audience, new audiences, but we wanted to reflect upon our narratives as cultural institution and see how video games could add a new way to understand ourselves. Well, at the beginning it was something very simple, just researching and playing. But like 8 years ago we changed our approach and we started to work in a different way. We wanted to change our teamwork on education applied to video games. We started with a project called Nubla. This is a project where our aim was not to develop a game that was generated by a cultural institution like the educational guides or something like this. We wanted the community to create the video game. That was a work collaboration approach. So it was focused on the act of creation. It's not about disseminating works from a collection, but to reflect upon the creation, the art creation act. But also understanding that the artistic could be not only on the visual and on the formal things, but also on the narrative. Then we changed our approach to video games. We tried to develop more critical video games with the institution itself. Video games like Animalario that we created 2 years ago for an expo that we created from our institution, which is a reflection upon our institution, and it's a critical reflection, and also on how we visit museums. So we don't want to replicate art on video games, but we want it to be a space for thinking and for changing the institution. Belén from the National Ballet, you have also developed an initiative in video gaming for communicating and disseminating Spanish dance. Well, in the ballet we work on the dissemination of Spanish dance. So I'd like to pose a question to the audience. Who could tell me what's exactly Spanish dance? Because usually when we say Spanish dance, we associate it with flamenco, when actually Spanish dance is flamenco dance, but it's much more than that. There's 4 models. This is flamenco, escuela bolera, folklore, and style dance. And the general public does not know this diversity in Spanish dance. This is our goal, and we started to develop educational projects because we thought that the children are very important, are the future, and this way we could attract both children and their parents. So we developed this educational project that we started with a book on Spanish dance. It was very successful, and it was published thanks to a patron of art that's here today, an American patron of art, that she has supported us always. She's in love with the Spanish National Ballet, and she told me, Belen, we have to think big. And I saw 2 images, the image of my child playing FIFA 2001, and then I thought of children, video games. So the way to get to children is through video games, through tablets and cell phones, and this is how I got the idea to create a video game of Spanish dance, and that started 3 years of great effort and lots of work to complete this project. And I wanted to point out 3 aspects of this project. The first one is the first educational video game on Spanish dance in the world. Second one is that this video game was not developed by professionals from the industry, but from students of the University of Madrid. And third, that this project has been funded by third parties, so through sponsorships and patrons of art. And Cody Dyer has a different profile because he's a technical artist in Arman Studios, Arman Animation. Probably you know this firm because it is a production company of movies like Chicken Run and Wallace and Gromit, etc. However, Cody was involved in a video game that was launched last year, 1111, published by Bandai Blanco, and was developed to celebrate the 100 years of the end of the First World War. And this is a very interesting video game because it's based on the impressionistic style, artistic style of the 19th century that we can enjoy in the Thyssen Museum. But Cody, please let us know about your profile and about your role in this project of 1111.
Hi there. We're working? Right, sorry. So I just want to give a brief overview of kind of where I've come from and leading up to, where I currently work at Arden. So over the last 10, 11 years, I've kind of worked in a myriad of different roles within the games industry, from 2D artist, 3D artist, technical artist, animator, UI, UX, kind of done a very, very broad spread of things. And from there, it's kind of expanded out to doing kind of consultancy for smaller to medium-sized companies. And in 2017, I joined, I was lucky enough to join Arden Animations and work on 1111 Memories Retold, which was published by Namco Bandai. And it's a fascinating and very, very interesting project. Not only was the timescale very short, it was called 1111 Memories Retold, so the deadline was in the title, which I would never advise to do. We were drawing very, very heavily upon traditional artworks, from Impressionism, Turner, Monet, and a particular animation called The Old Man in the Sea. As you guys, you can imagine the technical constraints of delivering, a painterly aesthetic inside Unity in this case was it was a very interesting winding road. We sat and meticulously analysed lots of other mediums, traditional artworks, animations, and we begin to deconstruct those and figure out all of the elements that we wanted. We wanted to create the painting style with. One of the things we didn't want to do during the process was to simply hand over control to the computer. The art director Bram was very, very keen on still having that human element. We wanted those imperfections. We wanted the kind of impasto type effects, the brush strokes, the things that give art its human, tangible qualities. So I worked in a very broad range of roles within Aardman, doing character work, managing a small team, environment work, technical work, very, very broad experiences. So I think that sums up my...
Sí, una de las cosas...
One of the most interesting things is that with the growth of technology and consoles, with a higher definition, with a 4K, 60 frames per second, etc., these are all focused to having a greater level of detail, whereas in Memories Retold, what we see is just the opposite. We have an impressionist style, and as you know, it tries to capture light, but there is not a great definition, neither in the characters nor in the locations. So the paintbrushes are very important, as he said, and if you see this in action, if you have had the opportunity of playing the game, you will see that it's very strange. It's like seeing a Monet painting moving. And I would like to ask Cody how you tackle this problem. How did you approach a video game without so much detail and to make it interesting for the audience so that the users wanted to keep playing?
It was very difficult. I mean, one of the core things we'd run up against, I mean, as I was previously saying, we wanted to recreate that kind of, all of those tactile qualities of real oil painting. One of the very difficult things was it's the level of abstraction. Where does something become gestural versus defined? So, I mean, the crux of it is an awful lot of iteration, and you're slowly building upon the kind of framework. We originally had a kind of cell-based brush patterning, which would take, you had cells all over the screens, and we'd have 50,000 brush strokes per cell, and so on and so forth. And then we kind of get to the point where everything was so defined that it actually didn't feel like a painting. We had too many brush strokes, so we then reduced that back. You'd have certain, so for things like when we were trying to define metals, they would have certain more angular brush strokes, although, that's maybe not how impressionistic painters did it. We have license to play there because ultimately the player needs to be able to read the space, as well as it feel, like a painting. So there was this very interesting tightrope walk and balancing act between getting those two things right. The characters in particular were particularly complex and difficult because the moment you have no detail on the face, they just become, very big blobby kind of messes. So it was just about, so we'd go in and we'd paint additional maps that would drive the way the brush strokes would sit across the face. Like this, the different types of brush strokes, and we could also control how the brush strokes would move. So we were able to create almost Starry Night type Van Gogh pieces, where we could have things spiraling around, and like if someone was angry, for example, we can make the brush strokes kind of move down their body faster, or as it was set in World War I. For example, the trenches, we could control, so if it was raining, we could have the brushstrokes move down the sides of the bits of geometry and things like that. So we're just trying to really play to the strengths of the medium, but also, like, the player needs to read the space. So there were certain points where we had to just rein back the paint style, and then, for certain dramatic moments, we just, cutscenes, for example, we could go, okay, well, this is now, you're watching a painting move, so it was, yeah.
Sí, y también siguiendo con eso.
And following on that, I'm very interested in knowing how you decided to make this decision of choosing this type of style, of an artistic style that I think is quite unique in the video games industry. And how did you present this? How did you justify this?
Very early on in development, so the art director Bram Tween had explored a few other different art styles. One of them being Cubism, because it felt, it's fitting of the period. But it inherently felt too aggressive, and you have all these hard angles. Everything's very, very solid. And, we wanted to make this it's a narrative-driven story that's it's about friendships and the unraveling of friendships, and the effects of war, not the war itself, but the effects it has on the personal stories between friends and family. We very much thought the two characters, Kurt and Harry, they are of that impressionism is of their time. If they were now, they would that would be the kind of medium that they would see and they would be looking at. So we thought it best suits the story that we want to tell. They're not like Cubism, for example, isn't of their time. That's something that comes slightly later. So it just felt that we could create that very soft personal story from a narrative sense, but also in the paintworks. What we wanted to do and what we were trying to create is a living painting, so that at any point you can screenshot the game, take a snapshot, and you can kind of look at it and feel like, okay, there's hopefully something beautiful and something very human in it, even though it's all it's all magic.
Rufino, siguiendo esa línea.
Rufino, following this line of thinking, in the Thyssen Museum, you're using video games from a more educational viewpoint, but seeing what Cody and his team have done with the Impressionist style in this game, I wanted to ask you if we are very far from making museum installations based on this type of video games, exploring and interpreting artistic currents. How do you see this? First of all, I would like to say that when we started making the video games in the past 5 years, is not really teaching anything in the sense that we're not trying to teach any art history, but what we want to do is actually reflect on creativity. To us, this is important. So what we are interested in is in the process in the long term. When we're talking about the Nobla project, this has involved many people. We have been working on the project for almost 5 years, and there are many people working on it, and we want to wrap it up. And the way we're going to wrap it up is by organizing an exhibition. And this idea is already inside the museum. So if we start from the idea of video games being a product of culture or a cultural product, and therefore could be considered in a way culture, it's true that we need to understand that video games will be incorporated in the art circle and in the museums. We see that in the art centers, video games are already incorporated. Contemporary art is using the video games language all the time. It's in the cultural production already. We also replicate the past in different ways, and I see that the three of us are representatives of the different ways of representing the past. Video games are already in the art galleries, as I said, and in museums and all sorts of art centers. But what worries me about all this is the fact that we might be trying to equalize this with other cultures, with an ancient or a classic culture, and I do not really understand why they want to enter spaces that are already created, and we don't realize that they're already incorporated into these spaces. Artists are already using video games as a manifestation of art, and I think this is where we need to focus, because from this idea, new ways of expressing ourselves are coming up, and developing new stories that will enhance the cultural narrative and complement our global culture and give it more angles to it. Belén, from the National Ballet, what do you think of the future of the collaboration between ballet and video games? There are already some indie games that have attempted at recreating ballet, like Bounce, that came up a few years back. But from your perspective, from the National Ballet, how do you see the future of this? Well, what we see relating to video games is that they are a very powerful tool to disseminate what the Spanish ballet is and to reach a great audience very quickly. We are running workshops at schools, so you go to these schools and you have just 30 children in that classroom that you can tell them about the ballet, but video games allow you to reach a very broad audience. But beyond the scope and the reach, I suppose that during the video game creation process, you had to pay a lot of attention to digitalizing the movements of the ballet dancers. Well, when you just put these two things together, Spanish dance or Spanish ballet and video games, this was very attractive. But when it comes down to how to do it, we needed to find a balance. We didn't want to bore the children with a game that could be too educational, and it had to have certain qualities that could attract the child and make them want to keep playing. So it has been a project that has been very enriching for us, because we have put together two very different worlds, because this included both real dance lovers and the real IT and video games lovers. So I think there is a lot for us to explore from both sides, and it could be very positive for both of us. We have a few minutes left in case you have any questions for our speakers today, like Cody or Rufina or Belén. No questions? Well, I think we can close our round table. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Gracias a los tres. Se me ha olvidado
Thank you. Thanks to the three of you, and I forgot to mention the moderator's name. It's Borja Bath. He is a critic. He is a journalist devoted to video games in the newspaper El Mundo. Let's move to the next panel. Sometimes that you've been playing video games, you have seen some cities recreation that are really amazing. When I was playing Tomb Raider, I saw London that was so well depicted that really gave me the wish to go back to the city, because it was so nice, so interestingly made. And now we have our next guest, Daniel Puertas. He is the CEO of the Pangea Travel Agency. So the floor is yours.
Nos iba a hacer una ponencia. De hecho, os vengo a contar un proyecto.
I am here to tell you about a project so I can get inspiration. So Borja suggested this, and I said, I don't want to deliver a speech. I suggested that we organized it as an interview, and I would like us to speak of a big blue ocean Yes, we started introducing Pangea as a travel agency. Yes, I don't know if you know Pangea. We are a startup that was born 4 years ago, and we wanted to revolutionize the travel world, to go back to the origins and invent something completely new. We have had change two very big spaces in Barcelona and Madrid, and we have turned them into a travel agency, a brick and mortar one, when the trend is going digital, and it sounded very crazy back then, but it's a space for inspiring travelers. It's more than an agency, it's an auditorium, it's a meeting place. And I would love the next Games Week to be held there, because it's so interesting and it's such a nice place. And I would like to see you next year and tell you where we are in what we're going to talk about today. Well, when we have played some video games such as Assassin's Creed in Florence, for instance, or Venice, and many other games like Days Gone or others, we were really amazed by the beauty of the natural spaces in Oregon, and we always have this idea of doing a certain virtual tourism, and the fact that we can reach places that so many people are making such a big effort to bring into the digital world. And I have had the experience of visiting the real places after playing the game and actually being able to move around because I'd seen it in a game earlier. So one of the things I thought is, if we go to Ireland in one of the tours that they run, going through the Game of Thrones locations, is there anything similar that we could do with the video games, with the most popular games? Are there any tours like that? Well, that's right. We have a research and development team that are charged with finding new trends, and we have seen that many people go to Venice, and as you said, they find their way around easily because they have played Assassin's Creed, but there's nothing organized. But we personally in Pangea, we run, for instance, cultural trips. We go to visit museums, or we go to take people to paint in the places where Van Gogh used to paint, or we run film trips. We go to the places, to the locations where the movies have been shot. So this world of opportunities that people really want to enjoy but do not find anyone that offers them straightforwardly. This is what we want to do. I will give you an example. I don't know if you know Iker Jimenez and Fourth Millennium. This is a person who, a TV anchor that works with paranormal activities and stories. And what we've done is that we have worked with them, and we are bringing people to the places that he mentions in his programs and bring the stories to, we materialize these experiences. And now that we are in the Games Week, a few weeks ago, with one of the a very important partner with PlayStation and Sony, we were already talking about this idea. There is a need, but as far as we can tell, this has not been covered yet. Maybe someone can tell me here that there's an agency that really recreates all these video games, but I'm completely, I am a newbie in the video games. I'm more connected with the tangible world. But now that I'm doing my research about this, it really makes sense that we can make people enjoy cities like Tokyo with the Yakuza's game, because in the game you actually jump in the metro, and when you do it in real life you see that the video game is really realistic. So the founder of Pangea, who is an incredible person, I would have liked him to be here today, says that we want to be the decathlon of trips. But he said that he didn't want us to be the decathlon of the trips. He wanted to be the Cirque du Soleil of the trips, to reinvent the troubles, the tourism troubles, and really look around and see who can be my competitor in this field. So what we want to do is to be a hub for experiences. We do not only have our own resources, we gather many companies, many startups. As I said, we have spaces, 1,500 square meters spaces in Madrid, Barcelona. We're opening Bilbao and Valencia, and we want to attract a lot of our startups so that they join in this project. When we talked earlier on the phone to prepare this interview, it's not only an idea of identifying the physical spaces, because in one of the games I mentioned, you are living the life of a student in Tokyo with everything that entails, to go and have fun in Segunda, or to take the metro to go to the classes in university, etc., to explore the cultural districts and knowing the different worlds. But it's also a cultural immersion, and to learn the way these certain things are represented. For instance, the fact that so many people in Tokyo use masks in the metro, and the game is the game represents this, and you find it sort of funny that people wear these masks in the metro, but when you actually go to Tokyo, you discover that this is for real, or the way that people act in a bar, or when they go to their worship places, etc. I think that this video game really does not limit itself to certain icons or certain specific, very well-known buildings, but actually goes in depth into the emotions, into the colors of the environment. And I think this is what we try to promote from the cultural perspective. It needs to be a cultural immersion. Yes, for us, we have always considered that it was more important the way you do things than what you do, because you can go to Tokyo and discover it as a tourist, or you can do it differently and say, if you have created a line of trips inspired in video games, why don't we have an author, for instance? When I was hearing Professor Antonio, whom I didn't know, and I was very impressed by what he said, and I would like to talk to him and have him join in our project to, for instance, take a trip with him and choose certain theme, either mainstream or indie. And I see, when I think about this project, we can have different segmented or targeted lines of business within this project, and we can show these locations guided by a person who's a real fan and who really knows everything that they can tell the travelers. We want to deliver a certain type of emotion to the people who go to these locations, and therefore we are seeing the connection between tourism and video games from the viewpoint of the trade fairs. Trade fairs are actually very important triggers for tourism, for making a trip. But also we can have a grand tour driving in Tokyo, for instance. And I can bring that to reality. I can make this possible for you. And it doesn't have so much to do with the money or the cost of things, because our idea is to spread this experience. We don't want to, although many people do not know that tourism represents about 20% of GDP at a global level, but we want to democratize it. And I think that aside these trade fairs, we can see another line of business that is devoted to knowing the video games industry better, knowing the studios and meeting the people who have chosen locations. Some people might be interested, and it might be a minority, but we see that there is still, this is still a new possibility. Or maybe we could go to Tokyo and meet the creator of the PlayStation, who doesn't work for PlayStation anymore, but we could make all these things possible. And the most important thing about this is that we do them in a community, in groups. Antonio said before that there's a difference between the game and the playing and the interaction with the rest of the players. You had mentioned that you wanted to create a community of gamer travelers. When I have a project in mind, I tend to have very big ambitions, and even though I started taking very little steps, and with the experience that we are having with the fourth millennium project that I mentioned, and when you see the people interacting with each other, people do not want to have a private experience. They want to share it with others who share their same interests. And I would like to bring this to different places, maybe that you can discover Iceland. And with my research team, we could find Icelandic gamers that could be your guides in the country. So you're not just stuck with the typical tourist guide. You are connected with a person who is not an official guide, but they're creating a different experience for you and for the whole of the group. And I think this makes sense. And then there's this third line of choosing video games and locations. There are cities like Los Angeles or Tokyo have many things to offer, but there have also been locations for the settings of many video games, and we could actually create a storytelling of what we are going to be visiting, even combining the three elements. For instance, visiting a trade fair, and then going to the studios, and then experiencing the video games locations.
Well, I told you, as a cultural journalist, visiting studios is not easy because there's lots of confidentiality issues. Well, I love it when someone tells me it's hard to do it. Well, for example, the offices of Wernix in Tokyo, you can visit them, you can go until the reception, but you can go to a store that's inspired in Final Fantasy, and it's interesting. Well, this is also the idea of being a hub. I try to attract to us powerful people that can help, can contribute something, and tell you, yes, listen, I can open for you my house, you can even camp in the studio. So we really believe that anything is possible. You just have to insist. This is what clients value. You can say, well, I can give you this, and the client will say, okay, there's nothing to compare to it because only you can offer it. And of course, we are not only physical. We know that the physical world is a trend, but also virtual reality, for example. We've heard that in a few years people won't travel anymore. Everything will be virtual reality. Ready Player One, you stay home and you are virtually traveling. So we are also doing some research on virtual reality. We're including virtual reality in our stores. You can travel to the destinations before physically traveling there. So of course there's lots of potential, lots of possibilities. Studios have become pilgrimage destinations for gamers in Japan, but also in Europe and the United States. And playing a Yakuza game, a version of Kabukicho, and going to Tokyo and identifying the bars, the Godzilla, the Golden Bar. This is a unique experience, and doing this in a community, we can see this on the Games Week in Madrid, or in the next week in an event in LA. So, yes, of course, the journalists are the ones that are really experiencing this world. And I always think of this in industries. I always say I want people to travel like journalists travel. Yes, everyone says that this is one of the few privileges that we have. Well, we're out of time. Well, Daniel, thank you very much, and good luck with this initiative.
Daniel, normalmente me gusta viajar, pero después de escuchar de a ti...
Daniel, I usually like traveling, but after listening to you, I even more. Yesterday we discussed video games and health. We saw some examples of how they're used for rehabilitation of people with mobility disorders. And today we will be focusing on mental health, how some video games can help in the treatment of some pathologies like depression or anxiety. We've got with us Michael Lebeau. He was for Ipsos Mental Health. He will be presenting in English, so if you need to hear the translation into Spanish, you have the headsets on this side. If you raise your hand, it will give you a headset.
I greatly appreciate it. Oh well, now I can hear myself. Hello everyone, my name's Mike. This is a presentation by me, and today we're going to talk a little bit about gaming and mental health. When they invited me down, they said that they wanted me to talk about some of the work that I've done, a little bit of the research that I've done, and today we're going to cover quite a lot of ground, so bear with me. Also, I realize I'm speaking in English. My Spanish is terrible. You would not want to hear me speaking Spanish. Yesterday, I learned how to say orange juice. So, firstly, I think we need a little bit of an introduction. So let me introduce myself. I'm Mike, as you've probably all heard by now. That one, if you're looking me up on Twitter, not the two girls who are stood beside me. I'm a Brit, which is why I'm speaking in English. I am Senior Research Executive for a company called Ipsos Mori, and I work in our gaming team. And we work with lots of different gaming clients. We work with PlayStation, we work with ISFI, which is the International Software Federation of Europe, and a few others in between, Bandai, Namco, Jagex, which is an English-based team. I'm also the head of video production for a production company in the UK called Rusty Quill. It's a podcast production company. I work in video. Yes, I know. Podcasts are audio. Yes, I read the job description before I took the job. My work that I do is live streaming. So I produce live stream content, and my end of year show is a big production which is about mental health, and we try and raise as much money as we can for a mental health charity through playing 12 solid hours of games with a load of comedians, YouTubers, Twitch streamers. Basically, it's me being paid to doss about. So, I'm also a gamer, I'm a geek, I'm an advocate of positive mental health. Of course, I'm also an advocate of puppies, and I'm an advocate of kittens too, because I don't discriminate between the animal classes. Now, before we begin, there's a small disclaimer, and that is a disclaimer that I always give whenever I give a talk, which is basically, this is going to get heavy. Like, we're going to talk about some really difficult things today. Potentially, you may feel uncomfortable, you may feel anxious. Please, if you need to, just take a minute. Just go, walk away, come back when you're ready. Honestly, no judgment on our part. I mean, we're with you, right, guys? Come on. Yes? Yes, there's one yes. Okay. So, great. So if you do need to take a break, please just go take a break, come back when you can. All right? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so, gaming. I mean, it used to look like this. This is an actual picture of me. It's not an actual picture of me. This is a picture of me in my room, in the dark, playing probably Metal Gear Solid 3, while my parents figured that I was wasting my life on games. Got a job now, man. So this is what gaming used to look like, and it was a very solitary activity. A lot of people tended to play on their own, or the perception was that people used to play on their own. What I actually found is that gaming was a lot more social. I used to go and play with my friends. We all used to come round. Any of you guys have something called a LAN party? Anyone? No? It's where you all bring a console together and you plug them all in together and you've got 8 controllers and no, you can't have that one because that's my lucky controller. That kind of stuff, right? So gaming now looks like this, which is really awesome. We have esports leagues now. We have whole events like this, Madrid Games Week. We've got Gamescom over in Cologne. We've got E3 over in the States. There's so much awesome stuff that's happening in gaming right now. And it's bringing people together, which is the best thing about it. So, mental health and gaming. Now, I know what you're thinking. There's a lot of different perceptions about how mental health has been associated with the gaming communities. And first, let's just address the elephant in the room. Yes, gaming disorder is a thing. Who's heard of gaming disorder? Hands up. Some people, a smattering of people. Okay, so for those of you who haven't heard of gaming disorder, this is what gaming disorder looks like. It's a classification in the ICD-11, which is the British Statistical and Diagnostic Manual. And it's classified as a pattern of gaming behavior characterized by impaired control over gaming, with a priority given to gaming over other things, other activities like, you know, eating, drinking, sleeping, that sort of thing, not alcohol, actual water. So the difficulty that I have with that definition is the first bit. The whole first paragraph is me when I was 13, because yes, I would stay awake until the early hours of the morning. Yes, I would eat Smarties because Smarties were the only real thing that was available in my mum's cupboard at the time. And also it would impact my next day, because when you stay up till 3 a.m. playing games with your friends, you tend not to wake up until 1 in the afternoon the following day. The last bit really is the kicker here, and that is that it basically continues despite of the occurrence of negative consequences. So it's a really long definition that only really, in my opinion, gets to the punchline right at the very bottom, which is that it's something that will cause you to have negative symptoms. It's something that will take something away from you that you would otherwise have if you weren't gaming. One of the big topics that we're going to talk about today is something that I talked about when I was in Gamescom over in Cologne. That's me there, talking alongside a few people with Doctor and Professor in their title. Then there's me in my classic, apparently trademarked black t-shirt, talking about my perceptions of this stuff. And what we all agreed on is that this doesn't necessarily fit the bill. It's a very interesting way of determining it. It's a very good definition of what a classification for mental health and gaming and the negative effects that are given to people who play games in excess. But the problem that I have with it is the fact that I don't think it quite works because of what the title implies, which is disorder. And I think that that's actually a very, very loaded term. But we'll come back to that in a bit. We're not going to linger on this too much. Gaming disorder is actually a very small part of a very big kind of thing that's going on. So we're not going to linger on it. We're going to talk about some other stuff. Around afterwards, if you do want to talk a little bit more about games disorder. Well, let's crack on. Now, there are a lot of things that I could talk about when it comes to gaming and mental health. Like stigma. How many of you guys have heard the term stigma? Come on, hands up. Don't be shy. A few people. Okay, so a stigma is like a negative attribution or association. You can think of it like that. Like, for example, psychopaths are dangerous. People with schizophrenia are dangerous. People with depression are sad all the time. These things are stigmatizing beliefs that people hold or potentially hold about people who have these specific conditions. My research when I was in Nottingham University was mainly geared towards stigma, this big word up here, which you're going to see a lot more now that I've pointed out to you. So stigma is a very big problem. Why is it a big problem? Because it leads to things like embarrassment. So let's say you have depression, right? You feel sad. You're bombarded by negative thoughts and you just need to get away. But you think that people who you're looking at will kind of go, well, just a bit sad really, come on, cheer up. And so that makes you kind of shy away from them. You don't want to talk to them. You feel a little bit more embarrassed about yourself. You feel embarrassed within communities. What does that lead to? shame, feelings of like, I don't really believe that I should be going through this. I feel ashamed of what I have, and I feel like I can't do anything about it. Which then leads on into things like loneliness, segregation, isolation, all these other words which the interpreters are going to have a hell of a time translating. These things all come together to form quite a big cocktail, which then takes a very large segment of the gaming community, puts it into a box, and then kind of ships it off to somewhere. So, and what I mean by that is that if you feel lonely, and you feel like you've got no one to talk to, not even your parents, not your family, not your friends, no one. You don't feel like you can talk to anyone about what you have because you're embarrassed and you don't want to and blah, blah, blah. It then means that you're not going to seek help. In England, we have something called the NHS, which is our National Health Service. They do offer mental health services and counselling. It's not quite up to scratch yet, but it's getting there. And a lot of these services can be reached for free. However, what that means is you need to be the one to reach out. And if you're feeling all of these things, there's no way that you're going to reach out to any of these services, even if they are made available, right? Kinda? Sorta? Yeah. So, with that in mind, there is a but. Not mine, that one. And it's that there is an upside. And that is that the games industry is actually helping to improve the narrative that we have around mental health. So, this is where you guys get involved. So, how many of you guys have heard of things like depression? Let's start there. Depression, anyone? Anyone? Depression. Perfect. Okay, great. That's pretty much everyone. Schizophrenia. Come on. Who's heard of that? Yeah. Good. Okay, great. Psychopathy. How about that one? Anyone? Smattering of hands. Psychopathy is if you are a psychopath and you have a lack of empathy. And anxiety. Who's heard of that one? I certainly have. I'm stood up in front of hundreds of people. So I think that with that in mind, it's interesting that there are different associations or there are different levels of understanding about these specific things, right? It's interesting that you guys have heard of certain ones and not others. So, with that in mind, the games industry, as I say, kind of steps in. How many of you guys have played a game called Life is Strange? Anyone? Yeah, there it is. There's a private guy over there. He's like, yes, I have. So, Life is Strange is a very interesting game. For the people who haven't played it, I won't spoil it for you because I very, very want you to go away and actually try it and play it. It's really good. The premise of Life is Strange is that it tackles teen anxiety within like a high school environment, or a secondary school as we call it in the UK. All of the pressures, potentially things like bullying, social pressures, pressures of like getting to deadlines and da-da-da, and what happens because of that. It's a very interesting narrative, and it's a very interesting way of looking at this particular kind of remit. So I'd encourage you to go have a look at that. If you don't have a console, and you need something that's a little bit more accessible, there are other things as well. Who's heard of a walk through dementia? No one. Okay, fine. So a walk through dementia, who's heard of dementia? Hands up. A few, a couple. Maybe the translators aren't catching up with me because I'm talking very quickly. Sorry. So the dementia is an interesting one because in fact, schizophrenia is a form of dementia. Schizophrenia, literally, the translation or the interpretation is dementia praecox, which is a dementia of the youth, and it's about the degradation of your mind and your mental faculties through your youth. Dementia in general is exactly that. It's about the degradation of your mental faculties, not being able to remember things, looking at things like, I don't know, your daughter or son, and not knowing who they are. It's very damaging, and it is one thing that actually affects families quite significantly. So there are a few companies that have produced app-based games to be able to help cope with this. And a walk through dementia is actually one of the ones not designed for the person who has dementia. It's designed for other people to help explain how dementia affects people. It's a very interesting game. It's available on iOS and Android, so please hit those up. Do it now if you've got your phones on you, and see what you think, because I'd be very interested to hear. I've had a look through it. I think it's awesome, but of course I do, because I've got it up on a slide. So yes, go take a look, see what you think. Boom. So other games, bigger titles that also address mental health are things like Hellblade. Who's played Hellblade? Anyone? A couple of people. Yes, you guys over there. Nice one. And you too. Perfect. So Hellblade is a really interesting one that tackles something called psychosis, which is, it's actually quite an umbrella term. It means a lot of things for a lot of different people. But in this, it's depictions of hallucinations, not knowing what's real, being dragged down this kind of well of, is this real? Am I going through something? Why are there demons attacking me? So psychosis is a very interesting thing. And Hellblade is actually one of the games which has been held up by mental health communities in being able to talk about this, because that's what I think ultimately we need to do. If you guys are kind of zoning in and zoning out, because I realize it's just hit 12 and you probably want lunch maybe, like if you take away one thing, it's that when it comes to mental health and gaming, we need to talk about it more. That's why I'm doing this thing. That's why you're all waving your hands at me. Because we need to kind of raise this narrative, this running narrative. The Last of Us, who's played The Last of Us? Yeah, that guy over there, nice. And you, perfect, good. So The Last of Us, again, is actually a little bit about PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. It's about a guy who loses his daughter, and then a load of bad stuff happens. I'm trying not to spoil as much as I can for people who haven't played it. Bad stuff happens, and then he has to try and figure things out. That's the very light touch way of looking at it. But it tackles the journey of one person through PTSD, through the difficulties that they're facing, and showcases it in a way that is accessible for other people, so you can kind of get a look into the life of what it's like to live with something like PTSD. Spoilers, it's difficult. So there are other games as well which have done this. There are VR-based games, which I'm not going to show here. There are VR-based games like Virtual Iraq. Has anyone heard of Virtual Iraq? Anyone? One person? Maybe? No? So Virtual Iraq is a VR-based game, and that leads me on to my next thing, which is games that address mental health, but in a slightly different way. So VR-based games are a new way of treating mental health. This is something that's kind of upcoming now. It's the second part of what I think the gaming industry is doing for people with mental health conditions. So Virtual Iraq allows you, were any of you guys at the talk yesterday? Did you come to the thing yesterday? Anyone? Yeah, a couple of people. Do you guys remember when we were talking about the role of doctors and the medical profession in, like, gaming and how gaming is being used? That's one of the ways that it's happening. Virtual Iraq takes you to Iraq, obviously the Iraq War, and it allows soldiers to be put at the point that caused their trauma with a therapist next to them. I know, by the way, powerful. Jeez. It allows them to be put at the point that caused their trauma, so where the bomb went off, when they were attacked. Then the therapist sits with them and works with them to be able to talk about that, to be able to unpick what it was that caused the trauma, and then help them to recover. It's absolutely incredible. You can find it online. I don't know if these slides are going to be made available afterwards, but guys, I'm an academic at heart. I've got a reading list. So if you guys want to go and read some more and these slides are potentially made available, it's all in there. If not, hit me up on Twitter @_MikeyScamp, and I will be able to send this to you. You can take a look at the reading list and have a look at some of the references that I've got here. So, I realize I'm rambling. At this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about indie games, because I was out last night at 2 o'clock in the morning with a load of Spanish indie developers, and they gave me a lot of inspiration about the stuff that they're doing. There's a lot of really cool stuff that's happening in the indie scene. How many of you guys have played indie games? Yeah, there we go, there's my guys. So I work in the indie scene, or I try and work with the indie scene as much as I can as part of my role as a head of video. I try and showcase the best of indie that I can find. I get talking to a load of indie devs, and then in my end of year show, we play a load of indie games from all over the world, and they're always really, really fun. Who's heard of A Night in the Woods? A couple of people. Okay, another one. Stick it on your playlist, man. Looking at you in the hat over there. Stick it on the playlist, because this one's a really good one. This one actually tackles depression in a very interesting way. It tackles it with cats. The internet is for cats, as we know. There are cats all over the internet. There are cats all over my Instagram. Just yesterday, someone sent me a picture which was entirely cats. So this one tackles depression from a kind of once removed way. You play a protagonist that you don't understand. They're rejecting of everyone, and you don't know why. They push everyone away and don't talk about, like, anything at all. And it's very, very interesting because it brings you in, because you want to know why, right? Why are they pushing everyone away? Why are they actually acting the way that they are? And through playing this game, you'll learn why. It's fascinating, and it's a really great way of displaying how depression can affect someone. The end of the moral really is that with depression and things like that, people aren't going to reach out to you. They're not going to go, oh hey, by the way, I'm feeling really sad, can we have a chat? No, what they'll do is they'll become reclusive. Remember? Shame, stigma, you with me? 100% ish, sort of. Nice. So in terms of how this affects people, we need to be reaching out to them in a very simple way sometimes, which is just, when you ask someone, you're down the pub, you're in a bar, maybe you're having a beer on a terrace, and you're like, are you okay? And they go, yeah, I'm fine, yeah, but are you okay? I haven't seen you in a while. Well, actually, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about. My wife's just left me. So, there's a really interesting conversation to be had, which I'm kind of making light of a little bit. But it's a very powerful way of being able to tackle things like that with the people that you care about, whoever that may be. It really doesn't matter. Then there's Celeste. Who's played Celeste? Yeah, a couple of people over there, a couple of people over there. That guy up there? Yes, this guy too. Nice. So Celeste is a really interesting one which tackles anxiety. So this one is one where you play as the protagonist, whose name isn't Celeste. The mountain, of which is themselves, that they're trying to overcome is called Celeste. Again, hashtag no spoilers, but basically they go through a series of different things, or series of different challenges, to be able to try and overcome their own anxieties and fears, while all the while being bombarded by this character who you've got up on screen, which is like the anti-version of themselves. And so they are trying to, I'm trying not to swear, they are trying to do as much as they can to give you a difficult time. So definitely one to stick on the list as well. So again, like I say, the interesting thing about this is, though, this is the way that the games industry is actually showcasing mental health. It's making it accessible for you to know what these conditions do, how they affect people, right? I think that's really cool. So the next thing that we're going to tackle is games that aid mental health, and this is actually therapy games. We were talking about them earlier. Has anyone heard of Timeless? No? Okay, so this one's a little bit more niche. Basically, again, this one is to do with dementia, but this one specifically is for the patient. So this is one that creates a timeline of pictures. So you take pictures of your cat, your dog, your wife, your son, your daughter, whoever, everyone, anyone. This is your house, this is where you live, and it allows people to sit with the person who has dementia and scroll through this and go, hey, do you remember this person? No, I don't recognize it. Well, that's your mum. Is it? It's a very powerful tool for engaging people in the therapy journey that you always have to go through every day when you live with people with dementia. Imagine having someone who you've lived with the last 20, 30, 40 years, and they wake up every day and they have no idea who you are. That's the kind of power that this game has. It's able to bring those memories back, or try and encourage those memories back. So it makes it a lot more easy for people to kind of talk about things and be able to raise that narrative with the people who matter. Has anyone played or heard of Sea Hero Quest? Yeah, these guys have. Anyone else Sea Hero Quest? No? Okay, so Sea Hero Quest is another game, but this is a little bit more academic. So Sea Hero Quest is a game that was actually published by a publishing house, I can't remember which one off the top of my head, and a university. They came together and tried to tackle the problems that sit around things like autism. So Sea Hero Quest is a game that actually allows you to diagnose in real time, almost, the pathing problems that people who are developing autism have. It puts you in a boat, and you have to pilot that boat to a destination. There's lots of different routes you can take. It has a leveling system. It is a game. This one has been widely regarded as pioneering in its field. And the data that they've been able to get from this game would normally take them a number of years to get. When they play Sea Hero Quest, 3 minutes. They can get all of that data in 3 minutes, which allows them to then imply or to start the process of diagnosing that person with whatever version of that condition that they have. With me so far? How are we feeling? Comfortable? These seats are really good, right? Yeah. So the next part that I want to talk about, and the final part that I want to talk about, is games that aren't necessarily designed for therapeutic purposes. They're not necessarily built to be a mental health tool. They're just games that people play to give them what I like to refer to as a mental vacation. It's a way of being able to get out of yourself. Let's go back to the idea of depression, right? So with depression, you're constantly, or even anxiety, to be honest with you, you're constantly bombarded by these negative thoughts all the time, every day, before you try and sleep, when you wake up, while you're having breakfast, everywhere. So these games allow you to take yourself away from yourself and actually just be for a little while, to take away all of those layers of everything that's going on inside your head, focus on one thing, just one thing, and then that will hopefully help you to get through the rest of your day. Who's played Stardew Valley? Yeah, this guy, man, you've got everything. I love you. So, Stardew Valley is a game essentially about farming, but there's a lot of other stuff in there as well. You can go on quests, you can go mining, there's romantic plots. It's literally got everything that Farming Simulator didn't have. And so this game is one of the games that is widely regarded on internet and online communities to be able to help people to get away from themselves. And that's really awesome. This was not designed for that. It's just that these communities picked up on it and they thought, hey, do you know what? This is really cool. Then it started to be spread around. And I think that's great. Journey. Who's played Journey? Yeah, here we go. So the indie scene is really hot right now, huh? So Journey is a game about going on a journey. And it's a game that you basically just have these beautiful vistas, these really nice artistic effects. Cody was talking a little bit ago about the art that's involved in some design. This is incredible art design, in my opinion. And again, so going to the idea of meditation, does anyone, you don't have to, but does anyone meditate? I do. A little bit, every now and again, sorta, yeah. So, meditation is basically a way of taking your mind off of the things that are troubling you, focusing it on one thing to allow the rest of your mind to find a kind of peace so that you can then go about your day feeling a little bit less anxious or being able to focus a little bit more, right? So, Journey does exactly...
Pues con...
vistas, you're allowed to travel, you can explore, it's linear, so you can't go too far wrong, and it allows you to just explore. And if you want to get out for a... You don't want to go outside the house. I mean, come on, we're geeks now. We don't leave the house, so... so it allows you to explore an outdoor environment with really lovely scenery, and again, just get away from yourself just for a little while, and it's glorious. Again, stick it on the list. Basically, what I'm here to do is to say you need to play all of these games, plus a few others, and also to encourage, like, we've got a load of games developers here as well. They will tell you about their games too. Highly recommend them. Anyway, then there's this guy. Anyone know this guy? Anyone recognize this guy? No? No? Anyone? Okay. So this guy's name is Johnny Chiodini, and he used to work for a company called Eurogamer. He now works for Dicebreaker, which is still part of the Gamer Group, which is an umbrella company. And he did a talk called "Can Gaming Save a Life?" This one. So if you, can a video game save a life? That's me next to him at my event trying to look cool, even though I was so nervous because he's one of my icons and I was sat 4 feet away from him trying to play Overcooked and I failed. Like, not even badly, just miserably failed. I couldn't get past the first level. I wasn't thinking about anything. It was a lot of fun. But through having him down on my show, what we were able to do is unpack a little bit about his talk. The talk title is there. Anyone want to take a photo? That's the YouTube link. It's an interesting TED Talk that looks at his personal journey through mental health, not only through his career, but in himself as well. And the way that he unpacks the different things that he did and the way that he used game mechanics, like, for example, the reward system. We were talking about the reward system a little bit early on. I think we were talking about the reward system as well. And so the reward system is a double-edged sword. Like, for example, pick me a game with a reward system. Any game. Okay, let's go with Tetris. So Tetris is a game where obviously you have like little blocks that drop down from the ceiling, right? They come down, and sometimes they're squares, sometimes they're lines. And the idea of Tetris is to try and remove rows by completing lines, right? It's a very simple concept, but it's very effective. So when you complete a line, you get a little noise. It's just a little ding, just to tell you you've done it. So that mechanic is something that we talked about a little bit earlier, as I say, but it's something that gives you that encouragement to do more, to play more. But also, when you're looking at it from a mental health perspective, it might be that you're feeling particularly anxious that day, and that little bit of, yeah, do you know what? I achieved something. You know, I did that. No matter how small, just knowing that you achieved something is enough to kind of pick you back up again just a bit, so that you can then help yourself to move on and help yourself to progress. So his talk kind of covers that a little bit more. Again, would recommend taking a look. This is how I do things. This is how I take a mental vacation. I like puppies. When I'm working, I have two monitors. I have one monitor which has SPSS on. It's got my data. It's got my analytics. One of my clients in the room, I have to say this. And I also have like a load of other bits and pieces like PowerPoint and da-da-da. And on the other screen, puppies. The way that I cope with these different things is literally just by taking myself away and allowing myself to kind of free my mind for a moment. So I'll put down the data, I'll put down whatever I'm working on, and I'll just scroll through a website and have a look at pictures of puppies. So one of the things that I'm trying to encourage you to do through this talk, right? This is kind of like the end messages bit now. So the bits that I'm trying to encourage you to do are as follows. Puppies. Are to talk to each other. Actually have a conversation with each other. If you think someone's struggling, it doesn't matter what with, ask them. Go to them. Say, are you okay? You know, and ask them whether or not you can help. Maybe they'll say no. 9 times out of 10 they probably will. But that one time might be the time that makes a real difference, right? So please go ahead and talk to people about mental health, about what it can do, about the effects that it has, and make sure that your friends, the people you love, the people you care about, make sure they're okay. However you want to do that is up to you. But go ahead and do it. Puppies. The other thing that I wanted to say as well is obviously there's several different ways that we've covered today that gaming has had an influence or an impact on mental health. All of these are really cool, but this isn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot, right? Exactly. So in terms of the gaming industry, please do, if you are a publisher or you're thinking of getting into development, whatever that may be, please do consider putting positive mental health messaging into your games. There's a lot of games out there which are criticized because they shine a light on mental health in a negative way. And what I'm trying to do is encourage people to do a little bit more, to think about the games they're developing, to talk to the publishers and say, we should be opening up these dialogues and it needs to be positive. Oh, and don't forget, Gaming and Giving is the name of my show. This is not a plug. Gaming and Giving is the name of my show. It's on the 7th of December between 10 and 10. It's a 12-hour gaming marathon where we play a series of video games and board games. We have Twitch streamers who come down. We have YouTubers who come down, improvised comedians, regular comedians, a group of mates that I know who work for Rock, Paper, Shotgun. Johnny Chiodini's coming down again this year. It's going to be awesome. You could be there, but it's sold out, I'm afraid. We sold out all of the tickets. So instead, what I would encourage you to do, phones up, is go to this link, which is twitch.tv/rusty_quilt. There we go. Hit that up on the 7th of December, and you'll be able to watch along online, no matter where you are. Isn't the internet great? Finally, it's in aid of Mind. So it's not just something that I do for the fun of it, or, well, I mean, let's face it, it actually is. But the whole premise of it is we try and raise as much money as we can for Mind, the mental health charity from the UK. Last year, we managed to raise £4,500 for them in 12 hours. This year, we're trying to raise £8,500 for them in 12 hours. It's a big thing to hit, it's a big target, and I need your help. So please do tune in if you can. Also, I realise you've heard a lot from me today. Normally, at the end of this talk, what we do is we play a load of games, but they wouldn't let me. I'm sorry, I couldn't bring my PC all the way to Spain, and so what I would recommend is if you are in London, I'm actually doing this talk with the gaming stuff involved at the end as well. So you can come, play with me, play with my friends, all of these comedians, YouTubers, whoever they may be. And you can come down to London and see me. The tickets are on sale at the Theatre Delhi Old Library. So hit up their website if you can and buy tickets. Please buy tickets. I need to eat. So that's about it from me. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Yeah, cool.
Cool.
Yeah, man.
Vamos a hacer ahora, después de esta...
After this wonderful presentation by Mike, we're going to take a short break, 10-minute break. You have coffee and the toilet's just around the corner. So when we are back, we're going to have Ryan and Amy Green with us, and I really want you to know their story. It's one of the most moving stories that I've ever heard, and I am sure that they will touch your heart as well. So let's have a 10-minute break and let's meet back here for the rest of the session. Well, I think there are very few people left at the coffee area, and now we're going to hear one of the most moving stories that I've heard in a very long time. It's Ryan and Amy Green's story. They had a child. His name was Joel. And when he was 12 months of age, he was diagnosed a terminal cancer. The doctors gave him very few months of life, but he managed to survive 4 years more. He died when he was 5 years old, and his parents, coming from this terrible experience, created a video game that they're going to tell us about now. It's a very personal experience and a very intimate experience, and I will leave the floor to them so that they can share with you what they have experienced.
Hello, thank you. We're here to tell you a story about Joel. It's a story about love and loss, faith and hope, and video games.
Ryan and I met when we were in high school. We married very young when we were each 21. We had our first son at 24. A couple years later, we had a second son. And a couple years after that, we had our third son, Joel. And I remember when Joel was a baby and he was little, I feel like one of my biggest complaints in life was that we'd had these 3 sons and we couldn't manage to have a daughter. And I think all of that just speaks to how normal our life felt. Mm-hmm. That in general, our life felt like the lives of all of our friends and our family. Every day kind of continued like the day before, and we expected that the next day would look a lot like the current day, and things just kind of rolled on, and we were living life as we expected to live it.
This is Joel on his very first birthday party. He was not a very happy sock monkey, and he had to tolerate costumes just like his other brothers, who had to be various farm animals for their very first birthdays. But Joel wasn't feeling well. His head was tilted to the side. In recent weeks, he had been vomiting, and we didn't know what was wrong with him.
At first, the doctors had told us it was probably a stomach bug, that we should just give it a few days and see if it got better on its own. When it didn't, they thought perhaps he had acid reflux, so they prescribed him medication and told us it would take a full week for the medicine to work, so we needed to just keep waiting. And ultimately, we couldn't wait the entire week. We were worried that he was starting to get dehydrated. It felt like everything we fed him, he vomited, and so we took him to the hospital.
Mm-hmm. There they did further tests, and swallow studies and blood work, and everything came back clear. And they finally recommended we did do an MRI. And for us, the most terrifying aspect of an MRI was the drugs they used to put him to sleep. And in that moment, in the family consult room, with the doctors explaining to us this new word that we hadn't heard before, and that was lesion. There was a large tumor in the back of Joel's brain. And thus, we entered the world of cancer.
And everything about the idea of having a son with cancer was completely foreign to us. It was not something we had ever worried about. We didn't have a family history. Cancer felt like the kind of thing that happened to other people. And as the doctors told us about chemotherapy and radiation and surgery and all the things that we would have to go through, it felt like we would never be able to fully adjust to that we would never be able to understand all of the terms, that this wasn't a life that we could live.
But we discovered something, as all families with cancer do, and that is that this quickly becomes the new normal. And so we were ushered into this journey of cancer treatment with chemotherapy and radiation, and we were on this journey of 24 months to recovery.
So we were kind of just counting down the time until we could go back to our normal life and resume our life the way that all of our friends and families were living their lives. And unfortunately, 10 months into Joel's treatment, he had another MRI. He'd had several. Each of them had come back clear after that first tumor resection surgery. But 10 months into his treatment, almost halfway through the entire treatment plan, his tumor returned. And our doctors told us that they were very sorry, that this was a tragedy, but that there was nothing else that they could offer our son. They told us that he would die, and that they could maybe offer some palliative treatment to help alleviate symptoms, but there was nothing that they could do. They had no further hope of curing him.
And so they gave us a window of time. They told us that he had weeks to months to live. And this was before his second birthday.
So we kind of did the math in our head. They said 2 to 4 months, and it was almost November. So I was asking the doctor about Christmas, and he said, I expect your son will still be here at Christmas, but I don't know if he'll be comfortable or not. And his birthday was in January, so we thought he might live to be 2, but what kind of party do you throw for a child that's dying? These are questions we'd never had to ask ourselves before. I was actually pregnant with our 4th son at the time, and we hadn't even told anyone yet. And we realized that, boy, his birthday was in April, so November, December, January, February, March, April. Well, no, there was no way that Joel would get to meet his little brother.
Thankfully, Joel's cancer didn't behave like they anticipated. And rather than the cancer exploding in his body, we were able to perform radiation, and Joel was cancer-free for 6 more months.
And he actually got to meet his little brother, and they became the best little buddies. His cancer kept surprisingly responding to palliative treatment that it shouldn't respond to, and so he would get a new tumor, and the radiation would kill that tumor, and no one knew why, but we'd have a good 3 or 4 or 5 months, and then he'd get another tumor. And we lived in this strange place where Joel was relatively happy, and we knew that we had a child with a terminal illness, but at the same time, we were living a life that I never thought you could perceive as normal, but that, again, had become our normal. And we got the privilege of watching our son grow up. He had 3 more years with us than anyone expected, and you can see all the photos of him in various stages of hair, or steroids would make him kind of chunky, and just all the different phases that he went through.
I think it's important to stop and note right now that we're people of faith, we're practicing Christians. And so for us, all of this good news in the shadow of such a terrible prognosis was proof to us that we may be experiencing a miracle. And for us, we wanted to share both the difficult things in our life, but also the joyful things in our life. And here's one example of our joy, and that is Joel's laugh.
Okay, show us what you were doing to make him laugh. Do it again, Isaac.
And you can tell in that video that he's scrawny. We were struggling. He lost his ability to swallow after his first tumor resection. He had one eye that was a little weaker because there was some nerve damage from the surgery. There were many things in our life that was hard, but this piece of it where there was joy and love, and where, especially as he was terminal and we were living with this extra time that we had with him, there was a certain pride and love we felt with him that we'd never even felt with our other children before, because it had never been so at risk before.
So Amy and I are creative people, and that was evident right from the beginning when Joel was first diagnosed. Amy took to her creative outlet, and that's writing, because what we could do is we could explain to everybody what was going on, and we can tell them about the ups and downs of Joel's diagnosis. In that same time, I would create art, because that was the way I could cope with what we were going through. And so in many ways, we found ourselves to be journalists of our life. We needed to tell our story, because in the world of cancer, it's the only thing we can do.
And I think one of the things that the extra time we had with Joel did was it gave us the time to really think about what is it we're experiencing now that other people maybe haven't had a chance to experience, and how could we express it? When I think we were so scared that he might die immediately, we weren't thinking creatively about how to express it, but all this extra time that felt a little like a miracle to us gave us the chance to think about what could we create? How could we share this world with people?
And it also forced us to reevaluate what was important to us. I mean, during that time, I went from being a application developer at a healthcare company to a video game developer at an indie video game company. And so in that time, we decided what seemed so natural to us to create a video game. And what resulted was something we call that dragon cancer.
Farmer Bill plays building blocks with the cows.
What?
Farmer Bill races the horse and Farmer Bill wins. My shoes were untied.
What does Joel love? Wawa. In cups, bathtubs, and the warm wet tongues and the cool fur of Das. And maybe the sweet mois of daily affection.
Do you know how they celebrate off-treatment day, like when kids are done with their treatments? I guess maybe you don't because you're not in the clinic as much as I am, but on someone's last day, they always bring them a cake and they sing Happy Off Therapy Day to you.
I'm sorry, guys. It's not good.
Basically, he thinks we should move forward with the radiation, and it kind of freaks me out, but it could be another miracle.
There's a story in the Bible where Jesus and his disciples are on a boat. And a furious storm hits the sea, and everyone thinks they're gonna die. Where do you think Jesus is? He's asleep in the back of the boat.
About our choice to create a video game to express this world we were living with our son with terminal cancer. Early on, people would ask us a lot, why a video game? And I think that's because when we think of video games, we have these kind of preconceived ideas of what they are, that they should be a puzzle that you can solve, or a boss that you can fight and conquer, or a challenge that through skill and cunning you can overcome. And I mean, honestly, that's how we wanted things to go for Joel's cancer. We wanted to be able, with the help of our doctors, to solve the puzzle of Joel's cancer. We wanted him to beat the evil boss and be an overcomer and be a survivor. Of course, we wanted to win, just like people who play video games want to and expect to be able to win. And what we found in our own lives is, no matter how hard we tried to make the very best choices, there was just a lot that was outside of our control. Video games are known for the choices that they give players. We like our games to have agency so that the choices we make can change the outcome. And we realized that our life wasn't like that. And it was the most frustrating part of our life, that there was no choice that we could make that would guarantee that we could win this challenge we were facing with cancer.
But there were moments of hope. There were moments of answered prayer. And one of those moments was a night that I had spent in the hospital with Joel shortly after they had told us his cancer had returned. Joel had become ill. He had become dehydrated. And I had been called to spend the night with him while Amy went home and looked after the children. Joel was miserable, and he was thirsty. And as you can see here, juice boxes were in ample supply at the hospitals, and so he wanted juice. And yet, anytime he drank the juice, he would vomit, and then when I withheld the juice from him, he would cry more. He was so desperately thirsty. And I just remember that night of being in the hospital room with him alone, without any of the... And any of the tools that I had formed by being a father and knowing how to comfort my children weren't useful. And so in desperation, I cried out in prayer to bring him comfort. God, just bring him comfort. And in that moment, that's when comfort came. And he fell asleep, and he was able to keep down that juice, and he was able to rest. So that moment of grace, that moment of providence in the midst of feeling so hopeless was something that I felt could be communicated through the game. And one of the first scenes that we created resulted in this scene that you'll see next.
It's okay, Jolie. Oh, don't throw your head, buddy. Don't. He drinks it greedily. Big, deep gulps. Okay, Jolie, that's enough. Breathe, kiddo. And he does. And I wipe his face of snot and tears and juice. And then he vomits, and I catch it. I always catch it. No! Don't hit your head on the bars, Joel. Joel! I know you're mad. Please stop. Please. Stop. I shake. I weep. I pray. I plead. I need peace. You are there. I want you here. I want you to call my son. And you've brought us this far. He's still here. Not dead. Not there. With you. Oh God, I want him here with me. Please. Peace. He sleeps. Thank you.
And that scene that you just watched is hard to watch. I think it's actually probably even harder to play, because as the player, you're looking around the room, you're clicking the toys, you're clicking the bed, you're clicking the juice, you're trying to find the thing that you can do that will help. And as Ryan described that night to me later, he said it felt like a video game where all the mechanics were broken. And so in this scene, that's what he created. And this was actually the first scene that we ever demoed and showed other people. It was about a 6-minute scene that you took to the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco.
There was something that I learned very quickly showing this video game and this scene to gamers. And two moments really stuck out to me in that time. The first was the first time we showed it in public. We were at a bar at an industry event at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. It was very loud, and and developers were setting up their games, and they were all supposed to be fun, and it was lively, and we just had our little laptop computer and over-the-ear headphones. And I remember this man who I had met a few minutes earlier came up and sat down and put on the headphones, and not 30 seconds later tore them off, stood up sobbing, and just embraced me and said, "I'm so sorry that you have to go through this." In that moment, I realized that we were holding players' hearts because we had done something that we didn't have permission to do. And that spoke to the very core of who they are, what they believe, the experiences that they have, and all of the trauma that they bring when they bring themselves into the game. And that sobered us, because while we were going through it, we figured we could tell an emotional story, but then there was hope at the end, right? Joel would recover. And we were willing to go there. But I think what that made us realize is that that we needed to be very careful, not only with ourselves and each other, but also with players. Second was an experience I had at the PAX enthusiast conference in Seattle, and that's where hundreds of thousands of 100,000 gamers come, and there's a sea of players as they go through and play all the games, and we were there as an exhibitor. And at one point in this narrative, you have to press X to pray. And for me, I thought it was just a natural thing to do because that's what I did on that night in the hospital. And this person stopped playing, stood up, and said, "I'm sorry, I can't continue because I don't pray." And that showed me that when we invite players into our video games, we're not only telling our story, but we're asking them to bring themselves into it, their beliefs, and their experiences. And what we found was interesting because you don't see that a lot of times in video games.
Sure. We always thought it was interesting that here was a player who said she couldn't keep playing the game because she didn't pray. And all around us were people playing shooters and, games no one stopped and said, "I can't play this game because I wouldn't kill someone." And so I think that maybe speaks to the interesting thing that happened is we invited people into our video game and said, "Come walk with us through this journey. Come bring yourself into it." I think that in the end, people brought more of themselves than we were expecting. They couldn't play it with a distance that said, "Oh, I'm just a character playing." They played it as themselves. And I think one of the reasons that they did that has to do with how we designed the mechanics of the video game. Oftentimes, as a designer is thinking about their mechanics, they're asking themselves questions like, how do I make this more fun? How do I make it more engaging? How do I make sure it's polished and intuitive? But as we designed the mechanics for that Dragon Cancer, we asked ourselves, how does this really express what we felt in that moment? We thought of our mechanics more like poetry. And so we were more concerned about how each mechanic in the little mini games throughout the game really expressed a feeling.
And so what we're asking players to do is think about the designer's intent. We're inviting you into a world, we're setting the rules, and we're asking you to understand us. And in turn, our exchange with you is that we hope to understand you.
And in that way, it seems like for players, they, at least in our video game, end up with a richer experience if they play through asking themselves, what was the designer trying to convey here and why? And in that way, we think that video games can be interpreted like you would interpret film or you would interpret poetry, with discussion and debate and analysis.
So, as we've said many times, the reason that we even endeavored to do this at all is that we figured we were telling the story of a miracle. Unfortunately, Joel didn't live. Joel passed away when he was 5 years old, while we were in the middle of creating the game. And so for us, to continue the project meant to reevaluate the design that we were approaching it with. Our first was that we were telling all the details of what happened to Joel, so that when the great miracle happened, we could explain to you, see, look how bad it was, but look how miraculous it is. And in the wake of his death, that didn't really matter. What mattered is that we missed him, and that we wanted people to know what he was like, and we wanted to know what it was like We wanted to show what it was like to be with him. And so we asked ourselves the question, in every scene that we designed in the game, where is Joel and who is taking care of him?
What's the matter, Joel? Yeah. What's the matter? Yeah.
This is an example of how when the game shifted from maybe a documentary of a miracle to a memorial, it was important to us to include the pieces of Joel that we had. It became apparent very quickly that we had much less of Joel left than we wanted. But we had videos of him, we had audio of him. The giggle you saw at the beginning of the presentation, we were able to put his laugh from our home videos into this video game, and we were able to choose not to put his cry in the video game. The cries you saw weren't his, and we took license with that because we realized it was no longer this linear documentation of a story from start to finish. The game worked more like a memory.
Yeah.
And so there were pieces of our story that got kind of folded into each other. And there are places maybe you don't remember it perfectly, or maybe you take 4 events at the hospital and you kind of remember them all as one vague idea. And we loved that a video game doesn't have to tell a story in a linear way.
And because of that, most art forms are linear in nature. You start with a story and you tell a beginning, a middle, and end. The power of what we could create in a video game is a space that didn't have to adhere to the rules of time. And because memory is imperfect, and because the memories of our life all fold together in one space, we could create a space and then imbue it, paint it with our memories. And so in that time, when you're playing the game, you can take as long as you want. Those moments of comforting Joel or making him laugh are moments that you can, or playing with Joel in the park, are moments that you can stay in as long as you want. And so in that sense, as storytellers, we're not in a hurry because, just like us, you might find that you don't want to leave the space either.
And we knew that we could only really tell Joel's story because that was the story that we knew. But we also knew that Joel's story was really the story of so many people. I feel like everyone's life is touched by cancer in some way. We all know someone. We all have some experience. We have something we're bringing into the game with us. And it was maybe a little bit of the design decision to have the characters be faceless so that you could put your own experiences into this story. So you could imagine it maybe a little bit more like you would a book instead of a film. But it was also important to us that this memorial we were making for Joel included other people and other stories. And so that was something that we made sure we added to the design of the game.
As the previous speaker noted, often we think of video games as something to be played alone. But we know as gamers that games aren't played alone, they're played with communities. And games aren't built alone, they're built with communities. And so we found ourselves, as we were taking this into the industry, that when we were willing to be vulnerable with others, when we were able to bring our story and honesty to that experience, we found that people responded. And so not only were they willing to help us financially finish the game, but they were also willing to bring the footprints of their loved ones into the game as well. And so sprinkled throughout the virtual hospital are footprints and handprints of loved ones, are messages to those who had gone before, and are the photos and artwork of children who had passed away from cancer even the previous summer. And so for us, it was a great honor that these parents were willing to leave the footprint of their children inside of our game. And so in that space, we felt like what we were creating became a sacred space, a space where we can remember not only the story of Joel, but the story of everyone who changes our world.
Video games are a medium of play. And that's another reason why we thought it made so much sense to tell Joel's story in the medium of a video game, because everything you do with children revolves around play. When you teach them something, it's play. When you help them process something difficult, you find a way to make it play. The hospital is a perfect example of ways that you take even little objects. We took syringes and we'd shoot them up in the air like they were rocket ships, and we'd blow up balloons, and you'd just do anything you could to make the experience fun and to make it feel like play.
Because play isn't something that we leave when we grow up. We are a generation under 40 that grew up with video games, but we also grew up and we had children, and we got jobs, and yet we still want to play with the games that connected us in our youth, but we also want to play with our children. And so video games are an opportunity, video games are a medium that we know is not just about play, but it has play inside of it. And we think that if we are to just be reductive and say that games are just about play, we feel like we are selling the medium short. There's so much more that can be explored, and so many more complex emotions and complex stories that can be conveyed through video games.
And we were both born in the early 80s, so we felt like we grew up with video games. Like every few years, a new console came out. But I think that we have hoped that video games would grow up with us. And I think we're starting to see that in the games industry, that people are exploring new topics. We are not the only video game that takes a really hard topic and tries to make it digestible for people who hopefully will never have to experience it. So many video games are starting to look at more nuanced things, societal problems, things we hope to fix or to change. And we're watching video games start to grow up with us. So that, of course, there's still the fun, wild, shoot 'em racing games that people like to play and can kind of just escape into. But there's also games that can help us think about complex issues and create empathy for people that we haven't ever had empathy for before, because you can watch a film, but you are kind of a passive observer of the film, or you can read a book, but it's so clearly someone else's story. But I think the real power and magic of video games is that you are invited in, you play alongside, you get to participate for yourself.
And one of the things that we noticed as the game started to be talked about around the world is that it is not only, a lot of people heard about Joel because of the game, but they never experienced the game themselves. They experienced a ripple effect, an artifact of the game through a journalist's story, where then that journalist then decides to tell their own story of loss, or through a YouTuber who gets to share their own personal stories while playing the game. But then you see hundreds of thousands of comments in the YouTube videos of people sharing their own stories of loss. So what video games can do is they not only invite the player in to a story, but they also create a ripple effect of art and creativity that expands out. And that's a special thing about video game culture and about the creative geek culture, is that all of us, or that many of us who love the medium also are creatives. And so I feel like these stories like ours serve as catalysts for change.
And so we just wanted to close by thanking you all for inviting us to be here and to share our story of Joel with you. You've no idea what a gift it is to us, because Joel changed our lives. Everything about raising him, even knowing that we would probably lose him, and recognizing that we had to risk to love him, it changed everything about us. And so, of course, there was a desire for us to take what we had learned and throw it out into the world. And I think because video games exist, and because there are people that are interested in new and different kinds of video game experiences, that little pebble of Joel's life didn't just get thrown out into the sea and fall and disappear, but there have been these ripples that have gone out into the world, and we've been so privileged to get to watch that happen.
We like to say that we created a world, and we put our son in that world, and we invited you to love our son and hope that that love would change you. And so we are grateful that that you've accepted that invitation by having us here. And so
we hope that moving forward from here, you will go and find these other kinds of worlds where hopefully as you enter into them, those worlds can change you also, and to look for those experiences that have that opportunity to change you because you're willing to accept the invitation of a game designer and explore their world.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mil gracias a Ryan y...
Well, I'd like to thank Ryan and Amy. I get emotional, I imagine you too, for sharing a story, a lesson of life. Now we will have a presentation by Jack Etrich. He's the co-founder of Flutter. They have developed this technology to combine video games and filmmaking. This is another issue we had to cover in this conference. So I give the floor to Borja.
To follow, but we'll try. For those of you that don't know, Jack here is a creative director at Flavorworks, and they recently released a game called Erica, which is like an evolution of the traditional FMVs, but with like new and spicy technology to like make things new in a way. First of all, how would you present Erica? Like very, very, very quick.
It's kind of like our take on a mix of the worlds of film and video games, where if it wasn't filmed, we would have designed the same game using traditional graphics. It's just that we decided by using film, we could try and invite more people that hadn't played games previously into the fold. So Erica is kind of like the archetype interactive like thriller in a very cinematic style, but the player can make choices that change the course of the story through either dialogue or through actually touching the world itself, such as wiping condensation off of a window and peering through to the other side, or even wiping a tear from someone's cheek.
Yeah. So in that regard, like, how would you think, or how would you say, or how would you describe the state of like these cinematic experiences? Because like in the early 90s, where we had like CD-ROMs, you know, able to like have all this storage capacity, we had like really 10 poles of the genre, like one of my personal favorites is like Gabriel Knight 2, The Beast Within. But right now, you know, with the, in a way, back then it was done as a way of like, you know, presenting lifelike characters when the technology wasn't there. The technology is now there. How do you feel these kind of games have evolved when, like, you know, it's not necessary anymore?
I mean, honestly, from when they were doing it in the 80s to all the way to what the industry had been doing now, it's very much stayed the same in the sense that you're watching a video, and it's very tricky because they say that games are like a lean forward experience, whereas film is a lean back experience. And the issue is, if you're watching video for more than a couple of minutes, you lean back and you forget that you're playing a game. And then when the game then invites you to interact, it becomes tedious. It's like a chore. It's trying to get you to change what part of your brain is sort of on. And we're used to games being incredibly interactive and immersive. And the issue with video is that it's flat, and the buttons are on top of the video, and you click a button and that loads the next video for the choice that you've made. And so in that sense, I've always felt that game and film were very incompatible. But my background was in filmmaking as well as game design and sound design. And when we wanted to make a game, we were like, what can we do that no one else is doing well? Because if I wanted to make a shooting game, you're dealing with these multi-million-dollar budgets and these multi-billion-dollar franchises. You know, the world doesn't need another shooter. For us, we were thinking that area of interactive video and film hadn't been utilized very well. And when I played, I had this thing of I would get my mother or my father or my sister and put them in front of a game and try and get them to engage with a medium that I was really passionate about. But the issue was they would find it, multiple buttons to remember, the fact that it's skill-based, that we're building on these conventions that we've used for 30 years. And so we don't even tutorialize using 2 thumbsticks anymore. But that's a skill, you know, like if you watch someone who's not played a game try and navigate a first-person camera on a controller, you know, they're just looking at their feet and then they're looking at the ceiling and it became harder for people to walk around a room than it did in real life. Yeah. You know, walking onto the stage was effortless here, and it is for a lot of people, but they found it almost like a whole skill. Yeah. And the funny thing is, games often, they focus on these external conflicts rather than the more nuanced things like opening a door handle, because that in a traditional game is really expensive to make. Yeah. But the benefit of video was that we could film turning the page of a book and allow the player to do that in a very tactile and delightful way. And so once I had an idea for how we could use that, my co-founder Pavle had to build technology from the ground up because the existing game engines out there didn't support video to this level of detail.
Yeah, you're talking about touch video. It's like your technology that you developed for this game, which in a way I feel like takes the entry barrier of the controller out, you know, so it makes people that are not maybe too used to play games to like interact with the game. But I'm really interested about, you know, like the production side of things, like how is it to develop a game, you know, primarily with a film crew, you know?
Oh yeah, so film and games are very two different industries. Yeah. When you walk onto a film set, it's kind of like been the same way for 100 years. You know, like everyone knows what they're doing. It's a very freelance industry. With games, every development can be different. And they say like a film is usually commissioned based on a script. And in games, we commission things based on like unique selling points, usually like 5 unique selling points. And so they're really different priorities. But particularly there is something you can take from each project and bring it over to the next. But straight away as a game studio, we didn't have any artists, you know, or in-house sound people or UI people. It was just designers, writers, producers and programmers. And so we spent a long time writing and designing the story in tandem and making sure that they really just felt like one rather than 2 separate departments. But then when it came to the filming, we didn't want that to feel like a separate department. And I think the game was only really possible with the fidelity we did it in because my background in filmmaking meant that this didn't feel like this alien industry. And so when it came to going to the film set and doing that, not only did we have to do things quite resourcefully because we didn't have an awful lot of money, but we had to work with filmmakers who we could kind of educate on games. Yeah. Because for them it was a whole different process. But at the same time, we were trying not to disrupt the filmmaking process so that we weren't creating more problems than we needed to.
Yeah, like I think like a normal playthrough of the game runs about 2 hours, like a feature film. But how amount of like video do you have like shot and edited for the game? Because you have like different, you know, paths that you can take.
Yeah, so it's tricky to measure because the player is interacting and making a choice every 15 to 20 seconds on average, which means that every 15 to 20 seconds it can go off in a very different way and give you a unique experience. But I think we aimed for about 3.5 to 4 films. Yeah. To get
so like 8 hours more or less of.
Maybe. I mean, it was a really big.
How long did it take to like shoot all of that?
We had to shoot that in 44 days.
44 days. Which is really tight.
Yeah, really, really tight. For you know, many films worth of content with a very small budget. So it was a bit crazy, but we just had a great crew and a great team.
And going back a little bit to like the touch video, you know, it's like you can play with the controller with the tactile, but it's better suited for like your mobile phone because the screen is bigger and you can interact in many ways. What do you think were like the biggest hurdles of like implementing the technology and, you know, like the main advantage of going with a phone?
Well, the fascinating thing was when we started and we quit our jobs and we were living on floors and sofas trying to find funding and working out how you build a company and find a team in an office. We were making the game for phones and tablets because you're interacting directly with the world with your touch, and your touch almost is like an extension of the film. And then we got asked to meet Sony, and I was a big fan of Sony and Sony PlayStation. And their challenge to us was, how would you bring this to the living room? How would you bring this to TV? And so we looked at the phone and thought about the idea that we could use it as a remote, where we're not having the player focus on their phone down here, they're just focused on the TV, and it gives them a sort of wide space to touch, essentially. And that was how we translated the initial design from just on a touch screen to essentially a television.
Yeah. And what would you say is the main what was the main hurdle of like?
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, again, it was brand new technology. It's getting your phone to speak to your PlayStation. There's challenges on how do you convince your audience to download the app as well as the game. And so what we just said, you know, when the game starts out, we say this is best played with the phone. You can use your controller, but we very much recommend you play with the phone.
And do you have like data that says like how many people download the app to play the game? If it's like the majority or if it's not?
I don't know yet.
No.
We are getting that data soon.
Yeah, that would be interesting to know. Yeah.
It's funny watching YouTubers, or Twitch players, they like have a little protest at the beginning, like, I'm not downloading this. And
it was my innocent reaction too.
Yeah, and then they use the DualShock and then they're like, well, maybe I'll try it. And then like, okay, that's much better.
Yeah. There's like a lot of talk about transmedia relationships between games and movies. You know, we have like a big game coming out next month that's trending, that has like big actor names that are well known in the movie industry. What do you see it the most interesting facts about the transmedia relationship between films and games right now, and what are the main opportunities and the main pitfalls?
I think the reason there's always been a challenge before is because these decisions were being made at a very high executive level, like a big film studio exec, a big games publisher exec, and they're like, how do we make our things work together? And then it's like, who takes the lead on that? You know, is it like the film studio wants it to be a film that's interactive, the game studio wants it to be a game that's filmed? And a lot of what we've seen in the past, if we look at something like even Bandersnatch on Netflix, it feels more like an interactive film than a filmed game.
Yeah.
And that's the way they decided to do that. With us, our philosophy is very much, it's a game that happens to be filmed. And that was very important for us because the play had to come first. And the question had to be, why does this deserve to be told through a game as opposed to through a film? You know, it's a very different psychology, and it very much influences what shots we use and how often we use certain shots and all sorts of language. It completely changed the way that we wrote, and so much so that like we gave ourselves a challenge of saying, to connect the player to Erica, who's our main character, we made sure that she never speaks unless the player chooses something for her to say. And the issue with that is that a writer's most powerful tool sometimes is a protagonist spouting exposition.
Yeah.
And once you take that away, it's like, well, how do we do that?
Contextualize things and
there's nice toolbox that screenwriters have, something you take away. And so those sort of problems can be solved more effectively in the games industry, which is sort of really famous for adapting and being agile and confronting those problems. Whereas I think the film industry has a little bit more of a rigid model. You know, and I think it can be a bit harder to get stuff off the ground. I had friends who I went to film school with who they spent, you know, last many years trying to raise a very small amount of funding for an indie film project.
Yeah.
And with us, it was bringing a demo into the biggest publisher in the world, and 5 minutes later they were like, we want to do this. And it's so fascinating how shockingly easy that was, almost compared to if we were trying to get funding for a film.
Yeah. Going on, you know, on the relationship between games and films, like sometimes, in one way you can invite people that are not familiar with games, to your experience, because it doesn't have as many like user skills required. But at the same time, there's like a very staunch resistance from like gamers to like they really want their games. They don't want to like go through movies. If they want to go see a movie, they would like go to the theater or something like that. So how do you feel this conflict is like going on right now and evolving?
It's challenging, and one of the biggest challenges was to try and tell people this isn't what you're expecting. It's not going to feel like Bandersnatch. It's going to feel a lot more like a traditional game. And it's really interesting, over the last few years, we've seen Supermassive and Telltale and Don't Nod and Quantic Dream, these developers around the world, doing these interactive story games using traditional graphics. And actually, a lot of the time, the rate of interaction isn't that high, isn't that intense. And we spend a lot of the game doing what's essentially free roam, where you're walking freely around and going from bits of content to content. Whereas with film, you're not traversing, and the story doesn't really happen during those traversal elements. So we're literally catering for every frame of content. It's almost like, I feel like if we were using traditional graphics, but the exact same design, we'd probably get a lot more interest. But there is that sort of that neophobia about that. Well, whilst weirdly on the side of non-gamers, there's that neophobia about games in general. And so what we were trying to do was give
it's like you're pissing off both groups, in a way.
Yeah. And so we felt like the aesthetic hopefully will help ease that sort of uncertainty from people that don't play games, whilst hopefully the controls earn the sort of the focus of a seasoned gamer. And what we find is that for a lot of people that don't play games, it's existing gamers that become the vessel to that. And when I talk to people who do what I do, which is try and get friends and family engaged in games that don't play them, they need like a game that they think the family will pick up and play, maybe on like Christmas Day or something like that. And so what we found is a lot of people that might not even want to play the game, that do play more hardcore games, are saying, oh, this might be how I connect with someone that I know that doesn't play games.
Yeah, and talking about the future of this kind of games, do you feel like the main theme probably is like the options that you have, like in the narrative, you can make some choices, but you went, a little bit ahead of that with like the touch controls and like manipulating like certain aspects of it. How do you see, like, first of all, like, do you envision your next game being in the same vein as Erica? And secondly, do you feel like there's room to like open up mechanics in that regard?
Yeah, so the great thing about building touch video is that it meant that rather than putting all of this effort for many years into one product and then, okay, that's done, let's completely start from scratch, we have this underlying foundation now with the technology and the design. And we built this editor that we call Cookbook, which in-house allows us to plot out an entire story and test that with storyboards and spit out a film script and then take that to a film set. And then once we filmed everything, we cut up the footage and we just drag and drop it back in to the editor, and it works like magic. And it's really powerful because that allows us to find new storytellers who might have something to say in this medium. And we can give them that editor and allow them to effortlessly create something without having to worry about programming and memory budgets and all of this headache stuff. So that's kind of what we're hoping for. And the idea with a lot of those touch mechanics is that they can serve many, many metaphors and stories. So, well, Erica was like a thriller. Now I'm exploring something fantasy-esque, but it can work for comedy and drama and horror or even action. If you decide that's the route you want to go, there's a lot we can do. But with every project, we're thinking, what are some new mechanics we can add in order to keep building on essentially this catalog of ways to interact with the world. So I think with Erica, we have like 20 different things you can do, and then we're reusing those for hundreds and hundreds of interactions. And so with each thing we do, such as fantasy, there might be some more fantastical mechanics we can play with, whereas with comedy there might be a whole other way of thinking about how we consider conversations and how we can allow the player to write their own conversation.
Okay, we only have time for one very short question, but I really, one of the things that I found really interesting about the story of the game, the narrative of the game, was like you played with ambiguity a lot. Like you had to to make decisions right up until the very end. That you wouldn't really know if it was all, some kind of fantasy, some kind of something going on her head, or something that was really going on, Like, how do you say you calculated all that precisely, the ambiguity of like the narrative?
Yeah. Well, the first thing was, we were saying, what's the point of having choice in a story? And rather than just giving you agency and a sense of involvement, we decided it'd be really interesting to play on how, we all read the news, but we get our news from different sources. And whilst you might see the same news event, two different news stories can really color that event in different ways with different biases. And so the opportunity to go one path or another meant that I could walk into a room early or late, and one character to me might be a hero, but to you might see something they do that makes them the villain. And so we wanted to have that ambiguity in the story, so people were forced to engage with other players and sort of discuss it over a drink or around a water cooler and say, okay, what was that about? And realize that they give information to each other, these different endings. And that was the way we were thinking about it.
Well, that was really interesting. I recommend to everyone in the audience to play Erica, but sadly that's the time we have. Like, Jack,
thanks so much.
Have a lot of luck with the next project.
Thank you, Jack. All these days we've been talking about the video game world from different perspectives. We've talked about education, culture, health, mental health, physical health, tourism, but there's something that we haven't touched yet, and it's the topic of the benefits created by the industry of the video games that also employs thousands of people all over the world. So we're talking about the investment in the video games industry. We have Alberto González Lorca. He's a representative from the IAVI. We have Maarten de Koning, who's an expert in investment. I'll leave the floor to them now.
This last round table, we want to take a look at the fascinating world of like game publishing and how things work, First of all, can we like make an introduction to the audience of which,
Sure. So hi everyone. Thanks for having me over. I'm Maarten de Koning. I'm a partner and executive vice president of digital development management, which is a video game agency based in the US and Europe and Asia. And we founded the company in 2005. And what we basically do is we represent all the top developers in the world. So we represent From Software, for example, Platinum Games, Romero Games, so John Romero, who did Doom and Quake and Wolfenstein, but also actually Spanish developers like Tequila Works and Mercury Steam here in Madrid. That's me.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alberto González Lorca, and basically I've been in video games for 18 years, having a long experience in all what is related to the funding and business development in video games. I work for Bandai Namco, where I have the responsibility of business development for EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East and Africa. I also have the responsibility, South Europe and BizDev. In BizDev, what we're doing is basically deal with people like Maarten in order to get content, which is what I feel all companies are seeking for right now. That is not Asian content. In the case of my company, Bandai Namco, we are a specialist in manga, in Japanese-alike style video games, and we're looking for Western content to complete our portfolio. And that's the thing, or that's what the work that we do when we talk to young developers or when we talk to agents. We're trying to establish business that will hopefully be successful for all of us. On top of that, I'm also chairman of AEVI, which is the Spanish Association for Video Games. And here what we're trying to do is basically put Spain at the same speed than the rest of the countries that we have neighbor to us. Not even looking to Canada or not even looking to the other countries, which are really far away, but at least inside the largest market in the world, which is the European digital market, be able to provide the tools for the industry to establish themselves here in Spain and for the developers to develop in similar conditions to the ones that you have in countries like France, Germany, or the UK, which you probably will see later in our presentation. And I'm very happy being here.
So, the video game industry is sometimes, well, not sometimes, I think most of the times is very secretive about their inner workings, you know. So, there's like a lot of stuff you cannot speak about freely without, you know, breaking some NDAs or whatever. But giving to the audience some general ideas, I would like to start about how games are being funded right now. You know, like the different options that we have, you know, like in the current market, what are the most, you know, seeked opportunities to like finance your games?
Yeah, maybe a good starting point could be to basically outline who the key actors are in the games industry, right? So obviously, as Alberto was saying, the publishers are like the number one party in the games industry that publish games, fund games, and whatnot. So basically, we have publishers, you have investors, that can be like a venture capitalist, it can be a private investor, but it can also be a fund, right? That invests either equity in the company or invests into the project. And then obviously you have other government organizations that provide seed capital or other possible ways of funding, or by setting up incubator programs for developers to be able to build their games, right? So, but I would say if you look at the games industry, from the old days until now, publishers are still the primary focus for funding games.
Yeah, because we've seen like the rise of like crowdfunding and very alternative ways of making these deals. But Albert, in your experience, like the role of the publisher, you know, what it entails really in our current climate of game publishing.
I brought a very simple chart, which because I didn't know exactly what the questions were going to be about, and what I wanted to address in this chart is that we're probably talking about different animals. Yeah. When we're talking to the last chart, which is the AAA title, 4 years of development, way above 100 million euros normally, 1,000 people, 600 working on the project, directly on the project, plus all the other teams involved in it. That's a very different funding animal. No, this is normally right now they're all in the stock market. I have one example in mind. If you take one of the titles which is going to come very soon, it's a Polish title. And I want to highlight that this is a studio in Poland, okay, because it could be in Madrid perfectly, or it could be in any place in Spain. This title, which we have relations, this company we have relations with since 15 years ago, is a company which last time I checked is worth 6.1 billion euros of capital market, based on a title that they do every 4 years. So the last title they did was The Witcher 3, worldwide acclaimed, and the next one, which is Cyberpunk, is dated mid-April 2019.
Not 2020.
20, sorry.
Yeah, so almost 5 years, you know. So.
Yes, so it's almost 5 years now. Yeah. And meanwhile, they've been able to basically go to the stock market and raise funds that have put the capital, the stock value of the company in billions of euros. No?
Yeah.
That's very different from, hey, I like video games, I would like to go to a smaller niche market where I would really like to have a small team, where I can find either some family or some friends, or even going to crowdfunding, and for 30,000 euros to 300,000 euros, have a game on 3 months' work, or I'm just talking averages, but giving the impression, no? So, and in the middle, you have everything. Yeah. You have studios with 50, with 100, with 25, with 200. So basically, you don't have just one way of funding, because you're not talking about the same level of projects.
Yeah, like that cuts into my second question. That's about like game budgets, but you're like explaining it here perfectly. We have, like as you said, like different animals. To use the example that you brought into the discussion, Cyberpunk 2077. It's probably, something around 150 million.
It's not disclosed, but
it's not disclosed, but we can
those are the levels.
But it could be in that range. I mean,
it could be in that range.
Like
and
GTA,
that production,
the GTA,
marketing.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Top of market. Yeah.
You need to double it with the marketing investment.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the level of investment that this project is.
Yeah, it's like some figures that rival the Hollywood film industry. Like how many people can be involved in like the making of this game? Like.
If I'm correct, I mean, the company is publicly traded in the Warsaw stock market, so you can check the latest number of employees, but if I'm correct, they are above 500.
Yeah, 500 to 600.
Yeah.
And the interesting fact is that like games like GTA, for example, they generate more revenue than the big blockbuster films.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So when I talk to investors or people that are not working in the games industry or used to our metrics, I always compare that example, or mention that example because, games are really big nowadays, right, in terms of revenue.
And to introduce another argument, okay, something which we miss in Spain and that they have in Poland, and I insist in Poland, is the serious respect from the government. And let me quote why. When Obama, the American president, goes to Poland, the president of Poland gives him an example of the new technology and how cool we are by giving him a Witcher 3 game.
Yeah.
That's the show, and that's the level that these people have in terms of attention and in terms of knowledge from the authorities. In Spain, we are getting there, but we are still a little bit far away from that.
Yeah, so you would say that one of the main reasons that Poland right now or other Nordic countries are such a fertile ground for the rise up of these big studios is the respect from public institutions, or is it also like access to funding outside of publishers, because these are like the heavyweights, and publishers get into this kind of a game when studios are really big. But when like CD Projekt was starting, they started out from a band, and they did like The Witcher 1 was like a really small.
It's a success. It's a garage success story. They started in Warsaw, in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Okay. With a very small, talented team. Yeah. Very small but very talented, and having a very clear idea of what they wanted to be. Okay. And in 18 years and 19 years, they become this incredibly successful.
Yeah, but these small teams. Do you feel that they have access to like publisher funding, or do they have to like go like to venture capitalists or to like banks to get traditional loans?
Do you mean which area,
which
specifically territory, like in Spain, for example, or?
Yeah, like all around Europe, like.
Well, I mean, let's zoom in on Scandinavia, because Scandinavia is obviously known for a lot of great games and a lot of great game developers. I think it's somewhat of a snowball effect. So basically, the government is providing support by, like I said, doing incubator programs, offering free office space, or providing seed capital or loans. Then the developer starts growing, they get their first hit, they work with publishers or other investors, which means that games market is booming, right? Yeah. And once those games companies are becoming successful, those founders are reinvesting in other startups. So it's like a vicious circle of startups making money, reinvesting, other investors being part of that. And that stimulates, I think, the growth of gaming companies. And that's exactly why I think the starting point should be by government agencies or
but
bodies.
That's what I want to know. Like, what's the spark, that gets all this ecosystem going, like, in your opinion?
Okay. In my opinion, my 2 cents would be, we are in a growing market. The video games have today 2 billion consumers. 2 billion people play video games in the world, and today, with the digital tools, we are able to basically talk to a worldwide audience, almost. So what you need to understand is that this is a growing market, and what we need to ask ourselves, in my opinion, in Spain is why aren't we a larger part of that, or what are we missing to be a leader on
Alberto,
that?
let's go into that. Like, do you feel like here the people that are making these decisions, and like from public institutions or from banks to like set out loans to like smaller studios, don't have video game culture, like in them?
So let me tell you one history. The first time we went to see the Spanish government, some authorities in the Spanish government, the welcome was good morning, sorry, buenos días, qué bueno que no tengáis.
Good morning. I'm so happy that you're not blue and that you don't have horns.
Absolute freakies inside one corner. That's not the attitude today. Today we have the support of the government for Madrid Games Week, we have the support, but we don't have the same level of support that you can see back there from the other authorities, from the other governments. And at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, we have Canada, which is an example, there is Korea, there is other markets, but our natural space is to compete inside the European market, inside the digital market, which is probably going to become one market, and it's today the largest one. Probably India or China will go larger, but we are larger as a European digital market than the American market.
Yeah.
So that's where we are today. But if you compare, yes, it's fine. We received last year 7.5 million euros. Fine, compared to 50. Compared to a program which is in place in the UK, where you get 25% tax relief in the investment.
Yeah.
And you get it. So we are moving, but not yet there.
But you would put the blame, so to speak, only in public institutions, or do you think that venture capitalists or hedge funds or people that are also looking like banks to make some money don't have enough, culture of the industry to like understand it and to like finance projects?
I think that money goes where money wins. So as Martin was telling you before, if you sparkle, if you start with government that basically puts the talent to work in office for free, basically is able to sparkle that, money comes later because the video games is a successful market. You don't need public funding for video games as such. You need to help sparkle the growth because everyone is making money in this industry. Not everyone?
Not everyone.
Well, careful. A lot of companies are growing at 2 double digits in this market.
It's a high risk, high reward market, though.
Correct.
Martin, from your personal experience in Scandinavia, how do you think things got started there?
Well, yeah, if you look back in the 60s, I think the government already made sure that in schools, English was mandatory for everyone, right? And what Sweden did, for example, was providing financing or like gave away computers for free to students and families just to get used to using computers and provide a free internet. So I think they spend a lot of money and time on making sure people were international focused and people were used to using computers and using the internet. And they always had a very strong focus on technology. If you look at the Scandinavian companies in general, they always had a strong focus on that. Hence there was Nokia and other types of companies. I'm not saying that Spain can now catch up and do that instantly with success. However, that there needs to be a far more like proactive attitude, I feel, where you start investing in those companies. Like we mentioned a few times now, start with providing office space, start with setting up a developer conference and bringing publishers here, investors here, and the government showing that they actually support these companies by providing, for example, tax breaks. Because those tax breaks make it interesting for other investors to actually start investing in these companies.
And Alberto, in your opinion, why do you think those tax breaks don't happen here in Spain?
I don't find a reason why. I don't understand why we are inside the European market, and if you invest in a studio in the UK, you get those reliefs. If you invest in a studio in France, you get them.
And we know that they work,
And if you invest in Germany, you also get it. So that's one of the things that we feel should clearly improve. I mean, we are competing inside one market, as Martin is saying. We have talent here. And by the way, to live in Madrid, if you're trying to hire someone from outside, is much better than living in Helsinki.
Yeah.
Okay. And Barcelona is much better than Stockholm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have assets to provide. So you can bring talent, and you can have here today. You do have talent already organized. You have people coming from outside the universities, which clearly now are competitive in terms of many things: education, salaries. So you do have here, like for example, the area of Madrid is 7.5 million inhabitants. 7.5 million inhabitants is a large European urban area. It's the third, actually. Yeah. So you should have here more established companies able to produce more for the video games industry. Because if they are not in Madrid, they will be, or in Barcelona, or wherever in Spain, they will be in Helsinki, or they will be in Paris, because at the end of the day, the market is growing.
Yeah.
So there will be more jobs.
Okay, let's say focus a little bit to like the figure of the publisher, because sometimes it gets like a bad reputation between like the games industry and sometimes the community as a whole. Like, how do you envision the ideal publisher's role should be, right? Like in this industry? First Alberto,
and then I'll be the bad guy.
Correct. Well, in the times where you have self-publishing, probably the ideal publisher is yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's probably the easiest answer. But then you find out that it is not so easy. You don't have the marketing support. You don't have the worldwide network. You don't have the funds normally to invest in marketing your product so that it gets out of it the full capacity that it had in terms of sales. So my advice would be that you partner with a publisher who has a strategy similar to your project. Here, when you talk to a studio, for me, there is two different talks. One is, are you talking to the studio as a company? So basically you want, because of the engine or because of the team or because of the IP, which is inside the studio, you want to talk to them in order to establish a long-term relation? Or are you talking about a project? I like this product, I would like to do it like this and this. And through that, you should talk to the publishers. Where to do this is in the meet to match that we're doing here in Madrid, and this is where the industry works. You meet publishers with developers, and in 30 minutes you get a clear idea if you like the product, and you get the publisher. And the system works everywhere. So,
but do actually like deals get made in these events?
They get advanced for sure. Yeah. Okay. Actually, that's the way to do it.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
So maybe you don't close them in those meetings, but clearly you start moving forward. Then it's when you start talking to the agents to see if you to go to a second step, to see if you want to progress into further.
Yeah, Martin, can you describe like your ideal vision for a publisher, and then like the role of the agent?
Yeah, exactly. So I think what a publisher is really good at is a developer has a concept or like a prototype. And normally what I see when we go into the creative process with a publisher, what a publisher is really good at is taking that concept and really basically outlining what that game could be, right? Because normally a prototype doesn't give a good reflection of what the end product will be. But a publisher normally has a lot of producers on staff, a lot of creative people on staff that are able to create, together with you as a developer, to create a franchise potentially of this small prototype or concept. So I think a publisher is able to basically get you to the next level in terms of where you want to be as a company with your game, right? By obviously providing the funding, but providing creative input, by providing input in terms of market data and analysis and trends. Because obviously if you look at Bandai Namco, for example, there are teams that are constantly doing projections, research, which is nowadays very important. I mean, you can, for example, say, I want to do a new shooter, but yeah, it's a super competitive market, right? So I would say the publisher can steer you in the right direction and can basically give you wings as a developer, right? What my role as an agent is basically I start very early with our clients. So normally they have a prototype or a concept, and then they say, well, Martin, we want to build this game, we need this amount of funding, and then we basically start an extensive process of maybe 6 to 8 weeks to really fine-tune their materials and make sure it looks top-notch, that there's like a gameplay video or like a decent prototype, and we provide the full documentation to publishers like Bandai Namco, for example. Yep. And we do the matchmaking, we set up the meetings, and eventually we work towards a tier 1 list of potential candidates, and then we zoom in on those candidates and try to negotiate a deal.
Okay, I want to focus now to like the differences between regions, you know, like Alberto, you're very invested in like Japanese.
I have one case which I love, which I normally say in some other places, which is in Sweden the case of Volvo, no?
Yeah.
And on how that made the authorities change of mind, no? So everyone of my generation at least knows Volvo. Volvo was the Swedish company, no? The secure cars, everything. Well, Volvo was sold to a Chinese company because it was basically bankrupted, and it was sold by 1.8 billion. Okay, I don't know, but it's probably 100-year-old company. Then some guys, by the way, my former boss, one of them, David Garner, found a studio in the Nordics called Supercell. In 6 years, they sell it for 9 billion. So that's the difference between the two economies that we're talking. One is Volvo, which was, honestly, probably Sweden, still alive, no? But at that time was really the Swedish company. And the other one was a company that no one knew of. It was founded from the scratch. They had no issues with funding from the beginning, but they were able to build the games that they wanted. Okay, and it was all based on the talent of a small studio, because at the beginning they were not so big, Supercell. Okay, I think that this is what we need to bring back to the Spanish authorities, and I hope we have a successful case like this one. We already have successful cases in Spain. There is a studio that has been sold by $250 million. That's a good amount to start with. Okay, so we are starting this, but we do need to understand that the potential is there. It's in the €9 billion frame.
Yeah, but like games right now and game studios are like competing in a global market, you know. So, Martin, the main differences between like the US, Europe, and Japan, Asia regions, what would you say those are?
Well, I mean, one is obviously the scale of the market, right? If you look at China on itself, it's such a massive market. And what is an interesting trend there, let's zoom in on China, for example. If you look at the current generation of gamers, they grew up with a mobile device. Like their mobile phone was their main gaming device, whereas if you look at Europe, and the US, this was mentioned today as well, we all grew up in the 80s with like personal computers and video game consoles, and never knew anything else. So that also has a big impact on the general business model in those markets, because as you know, on a mobile phone you play free-to-play games. So in especially the Asian countries, they only play free-to-play, and preferably on mobile, because that's what they know, live and breathe. But we're now actually seeing a shift that those gamers are moving to the next phase, whereby they say, hey, actually we are interested in PC and console content. We want to pay for games because we want to have more core and bigger experiences. So we're actually seeing that China and Asia is slowly moving into the similar space as we have been active in for such a long time. Meaning that I think free-to-play will always exist in this market, and it's still a very viable business model. But I think what we're seeing as an agency is that we're seeing a shift in games becoming more games as a service, meaning, yes, you still pay like a small amount for a game, but then you have a very long tail of content that is either free or either paid, but that game lives for a long time, but it doesn't necessarily have to be full free-to-play. So my summary here is basically that I see the Asian and the US and European markets slowly overlapping in terms of those business models, right? Another thing that is really important difference, and this is something I think you can speak to as well, I think in Asia it's all about online competitive gameplay, right? I think in the West we still really love our single player narrative driven games, adventure games obviously, and of course also shooters, but in Asia it's always very competitive and online. So
yeah, traditionally, for example, Eastern games or Asian games, Japanese games have sold well in the West, but not the other way around. Do you think that's changing in the future? Can we like put our products in those markets?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is maybe good for Alberto to tell more about like his Japanese portfolio, but what I see, at least, let's use China again as an example. There are actually a lot of Chinese developers that are now starting to build their companies, and they have the goal to build games for the West. And there are actually a few companies that I visited a few weeks ago in Shanghai and in Beijing that make games that we all will love. Yep. And so, again, I see a big growth there as well.
What you probably see here, no, just building on what Martin is saying, is what is a clear thing happening in video game market is that we are a very complex industry.
Yeah,
it is really very hard for the external consultants to understand what the trends are going to be, to understand which one is going to win.
And everything changes really quickly, also.
And some things not so quickly. I've been for now more than 10 years attending conferences where the boxes were dead and there was not going to be any more boxes in video games, and that was something that was already done. And when you were talking about a box market, well, you basically were like a dinosaur. And 10 years after, now the trend has changed. No, boxes are great. I mean, at the end of the day, we put, I don't know how many gigas in a game. You can not so easily download it, and it is not so easy to access. for a large part of consumers on a worldwide basis.
Yeah.
So you basically are going to see everything a little bit merging, no? We don't have one model that will sustain by itself. What I see is that if you look at from the side of content, what you're going to see is, going to my former chart, on one side, AAAs, those are going to be worldwide. You're going to have, going back to the example of Cyberpunk, good sales in Asia. There is no doubt, and good sales in the Western world. So the AAA titles are likely to be worldwide. And on the other side, you see the emergence, of small titles. Sorry.
Yeah. There's some water there.
Yes. Speak too much. So you see the emergence of niche titles.
Yeah.
Okay.
That play into like local markets,
which are regionally located.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that Martin brought up about the Chinese market, I'm really personally very worried about, is that China is a very closed off market for like people outside of China. There's all these guidelines that are not very clear sometimes. It seems kind of an arbitrary process.
Yep.
I feel like the battlefield is not very fair to everybody, you know, because they can like sell their products to us and we have like a lot of difficulty. But on top of that, we have all the political situation, you know. How do you think this is going to evolve like in the next 5 years?
Well, what I'm currently already seeing is that this doesn't only apply to Western companies. It actually applies to very big Chinese companies as well that are not able to publish their own games in mainland China because they don't get approval. For whatever reason, they're sometimes, I wouldn't say boycotted in a way, but it's...
Yeah, something happened with a Taiwanese game, Devotion.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's definitely some political stuff happening as well. But so what a lot of Chinese companies, big companies are doing now, they're setting up offices in the West to start publishing and funding Western games. So Tencent is building a full-scale publishing division in Amsterdam, right? Mm-hmm. I know other companies that are heavily investing in Western gaming companies with the goal to evolve them into becoming a development studio that can also self-publish, because they want to make sure they can be successful in the West as well, because China on itself is not a market that they can live on anymore because of all the difficulties. So that's already, I think, one trend that is happening, because it's so difficult now with the approvals, with the political stuff happening. So that's definitely one thing that's happening.
Yeah, but the thing I'm really worried about is like video games have been for a very long time now like a tentpole of freedom of expression.
Yeah.
And that has been coerced by the Chinese authorities. So do you think that we've seen some cases like, for example, with like Rainbow Six Siege, when they tried to do like the whole version for the Chinese market. Like, do you think that Chinese politics are going to influence the global video game market?
Unlikely. I think this will take much longer than 5 years. Maybe it will never happen, but for the coming 5 years, it will be very, very difficult. I mean, look at Steam, obviously, as a platform. They have the international Steam that is currently allowed to run, but no one knows for how long, and they obviously will launch very soon the China-specific version of Steam, right?
Yeah.
Which will only, and the actual number is not disclosed, but they only will have a handful of titles on that platform. And obviously a lot of titles that have gore or like whatever, like certain shooters will not be included. So they're already curating and separating, right? So, and that's like a platform that in general is government supported. So it's not going to change.
And when we look worldwide, everyone talks about China because it's 1.4 billion people and it's a very nice market and there is already an industry there. But you have India, which is another 1.4 billion people.
Yeah, but maybe they don't have access to like...
access to mobile phones, even in India, is now growing heavily. The market will be 750 million mobile phones in the year 2030, I think it is. Careful, 750 million phones. It's clearly
it's something.
So depending on the pricing, the moment the smartphones go below 100, something like that, the projections are that they will have, even if it's 100, 150, or 200 million phones, it's a really nice install base, no? And that's a market where you could probably have growth also.
Okay.
Because what I don't agree is that the regulatory issues in China can impact an industry of content which is worldwide and which is clearly led by the Western countries. Okay. Yeah, I think that's something that as of today,
we shouldn't worry about that then.
No, it's exactly the opposite. It's the Chinese companies establishing themselves in the Western to get Western content.
Yeah. And one thing I want to add real quickly. So as everyone knows, 5G streaming platforms, what they're expecting in China and the rest of Asia at least is that all those mobile phones will be able to play all those high fidelity console games with a controller.
Correct.
And if that really is like technically feasible and playable, then I think that whole market, including India, will open up.
Exactly.
So
it's just a matter of technology, no?
Yeah.
When will it be available at a price able to go to billions of consumers?
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
Thank you very much, Alberto, Martin. I hope that we were able to clarify some things for the audience. We're done then.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bueno, estamos a punto de acabar ya en estos 2 días, en estas 2 mañanas.
Well, we're about to finish. During these 2 days, we have seen how the gaming industry is about entertainment because we love to play, but there's also practical applications in other fields such as health or education. And it can also help us do something as private and as personal, which is sorrow for the mourning for a loved one. I just want to tell you that starting tomorrow and until Sunday, we have at IFEMA Madrid Games Week with over 300 stands, space for developers, space for manga, virtual reality, augmented reality. So I invite you to go there because you will really enjoy it. And now we'll have Jose Maria Moreno, director of the AEVI, to close the event. Well, thanks, Carolina. Good afternoon, everyone. The gaming industry is a fairly recent industry, 30 years old industry. As everything that's new, those who have more knowledge, they enjoy it and leverage it better. The younger generations have been playing video games for many years and they know a lot about games. The older generations don't know it that well. We wanted to leverage the framework of Madrid Games Week to disseminate more aspects about video games. Today, for example, we are hosting this event, this conference here in order to disseminate knowledge on video games, and there's another conference at IFEMA for developers with the aim of boosting the local industry. There's lots of talent in the Spanish industry and it's making money for the country and employment. It's providing employment to many people in this country. In this conference, we have been 2 days speaking and saying that video games are culture and are also a house that is receiving people from other cultural industries like music, design, architecture, filmmaking, literature, you name it. So nowadays it's probably the most complete and diverse cultural industry. So is making more money than filmmaking and music combined. So I think it's an important industry. This industry is also about innovation. We have seen how many possibilities it offers in other worlds, like the world of health, and how it's being used to treat anxiety, Alzheimer's, depression. So it has great applications in the health industry. Also in the world of culture, we have heard the Thyssen Museum or the National Ballet, how they are using gaming to disseminate information on the works of art that are in the museums. We have heard also about education and how teachers are using games as a tool to deliver knowledge in schools and how it is being used to teach history or math. We have seen other applications in the business world, like in tourism. So we're clear that games are entertainment, culture, innovation, and increasingly the future of other industries such as health, culture, or tourism. I'd like also point out that in this conference we have explained that we are a responsible industry that promotes the responsible use of games. Anything in excess is not good. So we'd like to provide use recommendations and guidelines so that there are no problems with our users. I'd like to quote what our first presenter said yesterday. He said that video games are not an innocent practice, but there are no human innocent practices. There's no object at the reach of human beings that cannot be used for evil. We all need to feel and we all need to release our feelings. We have seen it in the example of the Greens, how they have been able to release their feelings, their very strong feelings. We need freedom and autonomy as human beings, and we need games as well. This is according to Aristotle or Plato. We need play. Play is very important, and the way to play nowadays is video games. So it's been a real pleasure to start this first edition of the event Video Games, Education, Culture and Health. I'd like to say goodbye to all of you. I thank you for your participation during these days. Also the presenters Borja, Carolina and Telefónica for supporting us on this project. And I hope to see you not only in Madrid Games Week during these days until Sunday, but also in future editions of this event that I hope we will have it for many years, providing information on video games and helping us grow. Thank you very much.